Hour is upon us. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. Roll call.
Directors Huang,
Here.
Sethi, Weed,
Here.
Akbari, here, and Gunther.
Here. Director Sethi won't be joining us this evening. I'd like to first housekeeping.
Sure. Yeah, I can just quickly remind everybody. Welcome to members of the public. I see Sally Morgan's here. It's been a while since I've seen Sally. My name is Ed Stevenson and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this board meeting in person or remotely by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. Any member of the public participating in person may approach the speaker's podium at the appropriate time. For those participating remotely, note that the meeting agenda and all related materials are available on the district's website at acwd.org. You may reference the instructions at the top of the agenda for how to participate using the controls in the Zoom app or your dial pad if participating by telephone audio. This hybrid board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. Again, thank you all for attending. That completes my housekeeping remarks.
Before I call the meeting, but the pledge, I'd like to. We have sad news with the Union Sanitary District Director Tom Handley has passed away. We'll be closing the meeting out in his memory. I just wanted to put that out there. Our sister agency, the Union Sanitary District, and has lost a director, and we've lost a friend. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and start this meeting, and considering how close we are to Memorial Day, I will have Director Weed, former Air Force, do the salute.
Thanks. Join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States, to the republic which is one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Public comments on the regarding the matter of this. See, we have Sally online. Can't make out the other names from here.
The other names are members of staff.
Staff. Okay, Sally, anything you'd like to address the board right up front tonight, or?
There we go. Hi.
Sally, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you for attending.
So I guess you can hear me now.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Anyway, so one of my first concerns is so many reports going around about cyber attacks and hacking. Are we set up there in the district to prevent all of those things happening?
Well, I mean, it's related to the budget in that we do have, a cybersecurity program. Okay. And so I'll just mention briefly that, nobody's ever 100% safe, but right. We have a pretty stout program. We do receive all of the alerts that are issued by the federal and state governments and other organizations. The most recent one that you might be referring to, we've gone through the advisory, and we are in compliance with all of the recommendations that were made. Okay. So, I'm knocking on wood at the moment, but we are fairly well put together here.
Good. That's good news. Thank you.
You're certainly welcome to chime in later on in the evening. So,
okay.
We'll go ahead.
I do see another party who's joined. Phone number 195-144-26101. So it's an opportunity for that person to chime in if they'd like.
Sally's hand.
And I also see Sally's hand back up.
Oh, put it down. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think you might have to do that on your side though, Ms. Morgan.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Okay, any other public comments from our call-in attendee? Okay, plenty of opportunity to raise your hand and make comments through the workshop this afternoon.
With that, turn to the general manager to fire up our financial workshop.
Okay, that's great. Welcome, everybody. This is our first financial workshop or budget workshop this year. This really follows a lot of processes that have been going on internally here since late last year. And so it's kind of the culmination of a fair amount of work, but we're very interested in the board's feedback as we share a lot of information, and that'll include our financial benchmarking report for last fiscal year. So you can kind of, we do this routinely to make sure that the board and the public are aware of how some of the metrics that we use to track our financial performance. We'll also provide a presentation about a potential option related to monthly billing. And then we'll review the mid-cycle updates to our fiscal year 23, 24, and 24, 25 budget. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to our Director of Finance and Administration, Mr. Wunderlich.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good afternoon, members of the board, staff, and public. We do have a lot of material to cover this afternoon, and we'll do our best to cover it concisely while hitting on the key points. And so I'll just jump right into our benchmark report. And I don't know, I'll look at Mr. Salinas. Am I able to move the slides, or should I prompt you for that? Sure. I'll take the clicker. Okay, again, this is something we do every year since we implemented our strategic plan back in 2018. And this is really about transparency and about ensuring that our costs are reasonable using other similarly situated water providers in the Bay Area as the benchmark. So I'll run briefly through the metrics we look at, then go through the comparisons, and then some of staff's key takeaways from the results. And as a reminder, the agencies we compare against are Contra Costa Water District, Dublin San Ramon Services District, East Bay Mud, Marin Municipal, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and San Jose Water Company. Unfortunately, San Jose Water Company no longer publishes its annual report in the same format as it did previously, so they will only be included on certain measures. But all of this data is based on audited financial statements. Okay, and so in terms of operational efficiency, we'll look at cost of water service, as well as connections per employee, as well as revenue and cost per employee. We'll look at our overall financial capacity, meaning what's our debt coverage like, meaning what's our capacity to actually take on additional debt to fund capital projects. We'll look at our pension and OPEB liabilities, as well as total liabilities as it relates to our operating revenue. And then the rate impact, right? So then what do all of those things mean for what the customer sees in their bill that they get every other month? And so we'll do a bill comparison, as well as compare how our rate increases have been comparing to those of these other benchmark agencies. To provide a little more background on some of the specific metrics for cost of water service, that's how much money each agency is spending in terms of cash out the door during the prior fiscal year compared to how much water they produced. And the reason we look at it this way is because, some agencies have more property tax revenues, some maybe have steeper development fees and various other revenue sources. And so this is a way to kind of neutralize the impact of those other revenue sources and really look at the cost of providing service. And then total liabilities divided by operating revenue. And again, this is designed to give a good picture of the overall capacity of the agency, their ability to handle maybe a financial disruption or unexpected result. And then the monthly bill comparison based on 800 cubic feet of consumption, which is typical of our residential customers. And again, this is based on the bill as of June 30, 2023. As a reminder, we're offset from many agencies. We typically do our rate increases effective March 1, while many others do theirs July 1st. So most of the agencies in this comparison did a rate increase the day after our comparison date, right? Okay, so now running through the metrics, you can see that we're just a little below the median in terms of the cost of water service. The couple of agencies, without giving away too much, the agencies that are very low tend to have, on this metric, tend to have a wholesale component that's factored in. Connections per employee, again, here we're second highest, which would mean second most efficient in terms of the second fewest employees per connection, right? Or the second most connections per employee. Similarly situated with operating revenue, just a little bit above the median there. A little over $500,000 in operating revenue per employee. Then operating cost per connection, again, a little bit second lowest, a little bit below the median. But again, we're also not an agency that has maybe massive industrial connections like maybe some of these comparators have. Debt coverage, actually, for the first time since I've been doing this, we do not have the highest debt coverage ratio. We're the second highest, just barely inched ahead by another agency. But again, at nearly a ratio of 6, we're well above the district policy of a 2.0 coverage ratio and well above our bond covenants, which require a 1.25 ratio. Pleased to report that we're below the median on our unfunded pension and OPEB liabilities as a proportion of payroll. And then we're just a little bit below the median on the monthly bill. You can see that there's kind of the us and then A, B, and C we're all pretty close together. We're all kind of bunched up, and then some of the other agencies are a bit higher. And then in terms of the rate increase percentage, us, A, D, and E all had the same 4% rate increase last fiscal year. And so, we see some of the others obviously had larger increases, but so that put us at the median since, 4 out of the 7 had the exact same at 4%. Okay, and then in terms of the total liabilities, and again, this is going to be a measure primarily of your pension and OPEB liabilities, as well as your long-term bonded debt that you've issued for your capital program. Compared to most water agencies, we have a very low debt profile in terms of the revenue bonds we've issued for our capital program. And that's really the main driving factor here. It helps that we're a little below median on the pension and OPEB liabilities, but it is the long-term revenue bonds that are the main driving force in this metric. Okay, so how did things change from last year? The first thing is, even though we're below the median on cost of water service, our costs did jump up a decent amount. They jumped up nearly $2 per 100 cubic feet. And most of that is because your costs don't change a whole lot, but during the recent drought, demands fell quite a bit during that prior fiscal year. And so even though we went up, $1.94, we went from 7 cents above the median to 48 cents below. So that means we went up $1.94, but the median went up $2.49, right? And so across all agencies, water production was down 7%, 10% for us, and costs increase almost 13%, and a similar percentage for us. And specifically, and I think this dovetails nicely into our budget workshop as we get into that element, operating costs went up an average of 18% last fiscal year, across the comparator agencies, nearly 15% at ACWD. So there are just significant cost pressures within the industry that, we're all subject to. So moving on to the pension and OPEB liabilities, fiscal year 21-22 was not the greatest year for the CalPERS pension fund investment returns. So our ratio went up a little bit, but we still stayed below the median because everybody else's ratio went up too. The current fiscal year so far has been shaping up much better within CalPERS. So I'm hopeful that we'll see some pretty good progress based on the results this year. Once that's factored into the actuarial reports, which always lag by a year. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have the highest debt coverage ratio. We decreased from 8.7 to 5.8. But again, we're very well situated with our debt coverage, which again is something to keep in mind as we get into the budget workshop portion. In terms of the monthly bill, we're about $2 below the median, and we were the median last year. And we're within $2 of the lowest bill of the comparators, whereas last year we were $5.41 higher than the lowest bill. And so, kind of what that's telling us is by and large, the agencies with the lowest rates have been experiencing the largest rate increases. And the reason we've been able to keep making this progress, of course, is because of our overall low debt profile, which is helpful, which has helped us over the last few years, having cumulative rate increases that are about 8% less than the median of these other agencies. And so just as some general reminders as we conclude staff's presentation on this item, the reason why we compare against the median is that each agency has unique characteristics. And so for us to compare ourselves against one of those specific agencies on a specific metric, there may be good reasons for differences that are either favorable or unfavorable to us. But when you look at a median, then I think that's a reasonable and appropriate comparison. But as I mentioned, some have a wholesale component. One of them's a private company. Some manage all of their own sources of supply and so on. And this year we are, what I'll call better than the median. Sometimes that means higher, sometimes that means lower, except that we were tied for the median on the rate increase percentage. And again, kind of the main conclusion is we continue to have significant financial capacity due to our low debt profile. The fact that we have significant funding already programmed for those pension and OPEB liabilities. So I would expect that we'll continue to stay at or below the median for rate increases, within the Bay Area water community. So that concludes the benchmarking report. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah. It would be interesting to see on one of the benchmarks what the percentage split is between service cost and commodity cost, fixed versus variable, and see how each of the districts deal with that and what the implications are. So that would be a suggested addition to the process. There also are these are comparative measurements, and the next one I'm going to mention is probably may not be available from the other members, but I'd be interested to see the numbers and amount of referrals we have to collection agencies, which is a write-off, which we write off. We get about a small percent, a very low percentage of that back into our books. But if we could use that as one of our measuring points, if we could find out how other districts are doing that, it would be informative. Because there's a
Yes.
simple solution using the property tax statement to put certainly the service charge and the entirety of a delinquent bill on the property tax statement.
Yeah, so right now, the way we do this is by looking at audited financial statements. We don't issue surveys. We can potentially take a look and see what folks are reporting in terms of like a write-off for bad debt to see if that's reflected within the statements. In terms of fixed and variable costs, that would be asking them to do a lot of work for us to support our benchmarking, which, I'm not sure we would be able to get, but I do know on the flip side, on the revenue side, in terms of how agencies bill, we do present that information to the board typically within the rate setting process to show how fixed and variable revenues compare within the billing.
Well, it would be a bad debt factor line in their balance sheet, I would think, that they've written off these, and that should be reflected, I would think, in the financial statements.
Yeah, the only issue would be whether that specifically related to customer delinquencies is individually identified or not. So that's something I'd have to do some research to see what's available
I think
there.
as in our case, that would always be exclusively ratepayers that were delinquent on their bills. We've written off the collection on it.
Yeah.
And I've suggested mechanisms that would eliminate referrals to collection agencies. It's easy enough to do by utilization of the property tax statement. Those bills get paid. Okay, thank you.
I see Ms. Morgan's hand is up. Sally, you'd like to go ahead?
Yes, hi. Should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. My two questions revolve around some good news that the city of Fremont has. Some manufacturing plants are opening up, which is a good thing for us. But I understand that some of them may be battery related, manufacturing of batteries. Now, of course, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I understand that battery manufacturing uses a lot of water. Is that correct?
Unless another member of staff here knows, I can tell you, I'm not an expert in the industrial process to manufacture batteries and its water use.
Okay.
Certainly water use is a big part of lots of manufacturing and industrial processes.
So there must be some way for you all to keep track of that. And then I'm going back to one of your metrics, talks about industrial connections. Do we not have any industrial connections in Fremont?
No, I did mention that verbally. We do have some.
Okay.
My point was just that compared to some other comparator agencies, like some of the refineries that are a part of the Contra Costa system, for
right.
example, as a percentage for us, it's much less than some of these other agencies.
And then another comment would be about some manufacturing plants may have their own source of supply. Are they meaning water?
So we do have, I know it's not kind of specifically reflected here. We do have a number of private pumpers who have their own wells and draw groundwater to support some of their processes. I don't believe that continues to be a significant source of water use.
Really? That's not affecting my water use in my little house here in Fremont?
No.
No? Well, how do we follow water usage in these new manufacturing plants? Is that going to impact my ability to have water? No?
No.
No? We have enough water for all those plants, manufacturing plants. Yes?
Yes.
We do. Okay. I mean, is there somebody who could find out how much water usage these new battery manufacturing plants use? clearly it doesn't seem like it's a concern for this board. I'd be happy to follow up on that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we have meters for all of the connections to our distribution system, so we know how much water is being used by every customer. And for almost all of the wells, we have a metering program for them too. So I'm not aware of any particular concern over the use of a particular industrial application or manufacturer, but that's something we can look into.
I
And-
suggest
and
that you
we-
do. Sorry.
In terms of reporting, just as kind of general information, we typically do not provide information on a customer account to somebody who's unaffiliated with that account.
Well,
There are some exceptions in the sense of our largest users we do report on in our audited financial report. Just based on the volume of water that's used, we think that's of general public interest and that it's appropriate to divulge that. But, you know, just kind of setting expectations that if you were to call up and ask customer service or send a request to the district for information on a customer that you're unaffiliated with, we wouldn't necessarily respond to that.
no, I clearly realize that, but I think, you know, water usage is a big thing in the state of California. And if someone's using a whole lot more water, that's going to affect, you know, me and other ratepayers in this area. So that would be my concern. Are you keeping track of that some way? You must be.
We do a lot of forecasting on water. In fact, as we get through the presentations this evening, you'll see that actually our long-term forecast of water demands in the community are going down.
Oh, really? Okay. I think that's it for now. Thanks. I'll put my hand down.
Thank you. Comments well taken, though. Director Akbari?
No specific questions on this part of the presentation. Just, I think we're tracking well compared to other agencies. Obviously, some of the macroeconomic issues that we're facing, clearly it's impacting the other agencies that we're benchmarking. So I just wanted to point that out. Yeah, no specific questions.
And no questions from me, but just happy to see that we do benchmark well against our sister agencies. So, thank you.
No questions from myself either. And moving on.
Okay, so item 4.2 is a presentation about the possibility of going to monthly billing. As you know, right now we bill on a bi-monthly basis. But with the completion, 98% right now of the AMI project, it's opening up opportunities in a lot of areas, and this is one that staff has looked at. So I'll ask, I don't know if John, if you have any opening remarks.
Yeah, I think as of what I saw yesterday, we have something like 205 customers out of about 87,500 that don't have AMI yet. So, you know, we're about 99.8% complete and working to get as close to a full 100% as we can. And the cost of manual meter reading was generally viewed as kind of the most prohibitive, you know, kind of factor in considering this. And so, you know, now that we're here, we felt that this was a concept worth exploring. And so I will turn it over to Katrina Bates, our customer service and systems manager, to lead us through the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Wunderlich. Good afternoon, members of the board, members of the public and staff. Today, we'd like to discuss a proposal transitioning customer bills to from bi-monthly to monthly billing. Next slide, please. So why now? On occasions, customers have requested monthly billing for their own convenience and household budgeting. Also, with AMI project completion, meter reading cost is significantly reduced, which was the largest variable cost to switching to monthly billing. With AMI meters, billing reads are now read through an automated system and not through manual truck rolls. In order to prepare and test our internal billing systems and conduct outreach to customers, prior to implementation, we propose a tentative rollout date of 2025. Half of the customers would still receive a bi-monthly bill, while the other half would receive a monthly bill. All customers would receive a monthly bill starting August 2025. Currently, there are no proposals to change delinquency processes, such as timelines and minimum thresholds as a result of monthly billing. Next slide, please. Monthly billing provides level billing for customers, allows for increased engagement and communication, opportunities, and improves cash flow. The district is able to engage and communicate critical issues to customers at a faster, more frequent rate. Having level billing for customers also allows water bills to be budgeted along with other household bills such as their electric, rent, and mortgage payments. But it comes without cost. There will be a small increase in annual administrative and personnel costs and a one-time implementation cost of approximately $15,000 to update the billing system. Based on current customer behavior, the annual cost for monthly billing is approximately $435,000, which is about $5 per account per year. Next slide, please. Cost for monthly billing is an estimated cost and based on customer behavior. If more customers are on auto pay and paperless billing, cash flow would increase and printing and mailing costs would decrease. In order to support monthly billing, we would need an additional customer account representative for an anticipated increase in customers needing assistance. Customer care that used to be spread out in 2 months will now be handled monthly. Based on current customer behavior, the net cost for monthly billing is approximately, again, $5 per account per year. This cost could increase or decrease as customers move towards or away from paperless billing and paying through ACH or EFT. However, this cost is offset due to significant personnel cost reduction due to the efficiencies gained with AMI. Next slide, please. While there are costs to transitioning to monthly billing, staff feels that the benefits outweigh the costs. Customers will receive more regular but smaller bills, which in turn may be easier to manage for some customers and possibly reduce past due balances. So for a moment, I ask that we put ourselves in the shoes of a struggling ratepayer. If we are struggling to pay our electric bill, our water bill, and our gas bill, the electric and the gas bills are billed monthly and are smaller, but the water bill is billed every other month and is larger, which would you pay? Customers who are struggling to pay their bills will often have to choose between paying a smaller or a larger bill. And in most cases, they will pay the smaller bill. In addition to benefits for the customer, the district increases our touch points from 6 to 12 times per year. This will enable the district to engage with customers at a higher frequency, allowing for critical messages such as when a drought occurs to be distributed sooner. We could see an estimated increase in investment earnings of approximately $150,000 annually that could offset these costs. Finally, the district is currently implementing full AMI efficiencies into the customer service budget. And as a result, the cost of billing operations will still decrease with a transition to monthly billing. Next slide, please. Staff surveyed 29 utility agencies in Northern California, including neighboring water districts and cities. 15 agencies who have transitioned to mostly AMI meters, which means above 80% of their meters are AMI. Of these agencies, mostly have AMI meters, 40% bill monthly. The cost of providing water service is increasing, thus increasing bill amounts for customers. Some of the agencies surveyed with AMI systems and currently billed bi-monthly are considering a transition to monthly billing for the same reason staff is proposing it, for customer convenience and ease of paying their water bill. Additionally, the annual state board survey indicate 51% of water systems in California bill monthly. Next slide, please. While bi-monthly billing provides the basic need of billing customers, with monthly billing, we see benefits and conveniences for both the district and its customers. Monthly billing increases customer convenience, customer engagement, cash flow, and provides level billing for customers. Next slide, please. So this concludes my presentation for today. At this time, we'd like to request feedback and ask if you have any questions.
Well, there was Sally's hand up. I was going to ask, you're one of our customers. What do you think? You muted or? Okay.
Sally, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, so my question is, you're talking about paying a smaller bill every month, and then you use PG&E as an example. Those bills are not smaller, and I just think it's really inappropriate that you think that I'm going to pay $5 a year so that you all can change from bi-monthly to monthly. I've been here almost 40 years, always had a bi-monthly bill, no problem. But PG&E bill, why did you bring that bill up? Because that's a hot topic for lots of us. Those bills are never smaller. My water bill, luckily, is smaller than PG&E, but I just think it's really kind of shameful on your part to use that as an example. I would not be happy about a monthly bill. I just think you're throwing it out the wrong way. PG&E, why'd you bring up PG&E? They're pushing for, monthly rates. And that's not going to help low-income people. I'm not low-income, but still think about low-income people and PG&E. And are you moving towards a monthly rate like PG&E wants to? I mean, I'm talking too fast. Sorry. I don't know. I don't like the idea. There's my answer.
Greatly appreciate that.
Sorry.
Director Weed.
Yes, I've supported monthly billing for years. It's something I believe we should have started years ago. We got locked into a curious mindset that we had to have a meter read with each billing, and I think we could have decoupled that. It wasn't a major issue, and particularly and we could have spread out the meter reading, particularly for residential, which are incredibly consistent and level year round. But that being, we're proceeding, we now have AMI. The question I have, we now have an increasing percentage of our customers are having automatic payments on their credit cards. Is that also included in your $5 charge, or is the $5, is that an expense to us to do that is reflected in the $5 per month?
Yes.
Per year?
Yes, it is.
Billing?
Yes.
And that would be
Yes.
carried. And next, I would note that if we were to put the service charge onto the property tax bill, the amount of money we're dealing with was extremely less. The next question comes in the need for additional personnel. Currently, our staff is $130 an hour on average, is chasing $25 delinquencies. Have we considered increasing the amount of delinquencies that we're pursuing to maybe $250? And wouldn't that have a dramatic impact on the workload on the staff in your office?
So the reason why we're requesting for another staff members to respond to customer requests and not delinquency. We don't expect a change in delinquencies because we are bound by SB 998 in the timeline.
Well, you have the timelines, but we're also going after and executing those timelines on remarkably low levels of delinquencies. So my point being that we do have the ability, do we not, to use the threshold for which we pursue, increase it by an order of magnitude to $250 versus $25.
It's something we could look at, but with the reduced amount of the bills, we're not proposing to reduce the amount of the thresholds as well. It would be staying there.
Well, I would think if you look at the amount of time and the number of people we have chasing delinquencies, that we might be able to cut that at least in half, if not more. Thank you.
So in our LICA committee meeting last week, we went over some customer surveys and feedback that we got from that. And I know one question that was proposed or that was posed to respondents was on their opinion on moving to monthly billing. Can you just remind us on what those results were?
I believe.
I can take that one. Yeah, so the question, first off, the question was phrased as the district currently bills bi-monthly. So the question kind of set bi-monthly billing as the anchor. And so basically it was I think between 35 to 40% that said they preferred bi-monthly. So basically when presented with bi-monthly as the anchor, that's what they said. You know, most customers actually said they don't really care either way. And then there was about 20% that said, absolutely, I would want you to change to monthly. And so I know in our discussions with the firm that did the research, he didn't feel like this was a clear response either way in terms of kind of customer perspective on you absolutely should or shouldn't.
I don't have a strong opinion on moving to monthly billing. I think in my mind, after we've fully implemented AMI, I think it makes sense then to look at making changes to how we bill, how frequently we bill. Obviously, I have my perspective on what the billing structure should look like. I personally would kind of hold off until full implementation of AMI, but it's not a strong opinion one way or the other. But thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, I guess I will say I'm torn. I understand just based on the billing options slide that there definitely is customer convenience, customer engagement benefits. I am wondering about customer convenience since I think more and more our customers going to go to automatic billing. So it's not like they have to write a check every month, right? And I would also hazard a guess that most of our customers do not even look at their bill. Things just happen and it gets paid, right? So from that standpoint, I really don't see any positive benefits to our customer going from monthly to bi-monthly. Customer engagement, I can see benefits. We do bill inserts, but then once again, how many people actually read the bill inserts, right? And we're also going to electronic billing. So I am honestly torn because the additional administrative cost is not insignificant. And I am a little bit curious about the $600,000 number figure that the approximate administrative cost and personnel cost. Is that all in cost, including benefits, or is that just salary?
Yes, so it's total costs.
Okay.
Almost all of the cost is because we'd go from issuing 500,000 bills a year to 1 million.
Right.
And it's the cost to issue, like to mail the bill. It's the cost to, we pay the bank 20 cents to process a check for us. We pay our payment processing vendor like 40 cents to process a credit card payment, right? So that's where almost all of those costs are for those things. And what Ms. Bates was alluding to is, if in theory, if we could have all our customers on auto pay from their bank account and e-billing, our operations would be cheaper with monthly billing than they would be with bi-monthly billing if everybody got a paper bill and paid by
Right.
credit card, right? So it's a lot of it just depends on customer behavior. And should we move forward, then we would seek to do a lot of customer outreach and engagement to try to encourage people to go, say, to e-billing and some of those things.
But can the same thing be said that we could just currently with our bi-monthly billing, we could just encourage our customer to go towards paperless, then we will reap the same savings, right? That type of saving is not necessarily tied to monthly or bi-monthly. It's literally tied to people's behavior and desires.
No, absolutely. And we do periodically do outreach to customers to encourage that. We probably at least once a year in the aqueduct, we have a little blurb about that and other outreach that we do. So, absolutely, we're always encouraging that.
So I am just going to say that I am torn. I'm really on the fence about moving towards monthly billing because at this point I am still seeing the cost is still greater than the benefit, at least for me personally. So I will keep on watching it. I know you have a proposed timeline, and I am assuming this is not when we have to decide. You're just taking out temperature, for lack of better terms.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be decided tonight.
Okay.
But it's not something that we could say, decide this time next year and still go live July 1st of next year, right? And so it's something we could come back and keep talking with the board about it in future meetings.
I'm just gonna say at this point, I'm torn. I'm leaning towards no, but I will keep an open mind when you bring it back.
Okay, you know, when I came in tonight, I was totally in favor. And, you know, I heard Morgan comments. And I started thinking about it myself. I'm on auto pay. And my auto pay got messed up, so I had to actually write a check. And I still know how to write checks. Auto pay for me has been wonderful. But I started to sit here realizing that, you know, if I had to write checks, if I wasn't on auto pay, I'm now doubling my check writing. Writing that check every 30 days instead of every 60. And it's a small amount, you know, a small amount of time, small amount of effort. But it can be significant. You know, if we'd be doubling somebody, they have to do that. Grab a stamp maybe, because if they do it manually and they actually mail it, they come to the district to pay it. I have another member of the public I'll talk to. He's one of our customers. He's very adamant about the billing process here, so I'll find out what he has to say. So I came in supporting it, and now I'm 50-50. I like the concept that we would have the bill or the money come in monthly versus bi-monthly. I think the funds coming in monthly versus bi-monthly there's an advantage to that. Not sure about the cost advantage. But then the aggravation factor on the customer may be more than we think. Just something to think about. Because, you know, we heard loud and clear from one customer, she doesn't want to do it. And sitting here as well, I'll tell you, if I was writing that check instead of on auto pay, I'd probably be saying the same thing. Particularly with the cost of a stamp today. You know, he said, I encourage auto pay, but not everybody does it. And we can't forget that. My one friend, who's our customer boy, he does not auto pay. He pays by check. He's every now and then we chat. He's another fellow railroader, and so he has strong opinions. And I think sometimes we have to recognize that too. So right now, 50-50. I'd say we keep it on the table.
Sure.
Yeah.
As John, as Mr. Wunderlich said, we will table it for now and come back at a future date.
Well, could you tell us what percentage of our customers currently are using auto pay and what is the trend line?
Oh, gosh. I think last time I looked at this, it was about 20,000 of our customers are on auto pay.
How much?
20,000, about around that range.
Yeah, I think we could verify those numbers and send that to the board. And then we could, you know, kind of add that information. Again, this isn't like in kind of urgent decision, and the board doesn't need to like adopt a policy to make this change or anything like that. So, you know, kind of given what we're hearing tonight, we'll go back and we'll consider, you know, kind of what additional information we could present that would be helpful. And I would suggest that perhaps no later than one of our rate setting workshops this summer, we would bring that back. And that would still give us plenty of time to go live next July 1st. As we get into the budget workshop, there is one staffing related item related to this as we heard this evening. So, you know, I've got maybe a thought in my mind of how we might handle that, and we can cover that when we get to that point.
Okay. So if we currently have 25% of our customers, a little under, on auto pay, is it not our hope to get that up closer to well over 90%? And might this monthly billing be an encouragement for people to do auto pay?
Yes,
Yes, that's our thought.
yeah.
But I don't, please don't rely. I think we need to go back and look at the numbers. So, but yes, we would plan to do, because again, it's true that we're always trying to encourage our customers to do this. We always want them to do this. But the thought is that a change like this could also be a catalyst that would motivate a lot of people to change their behavior.
And I'll take a gratuitous comment that's saying putting this service charge, particularly if you get it up to 80% of the total bill, would be a universal auto pay for 80% of our cost and income. Thank you.
One more comment. I don't know if it's even doable or feasible. Would it be possible to do a opt out to a customer so they could continue to be billed bi-monthly instead of monthly?
I think
Maybe
that
asking
would be extremely cumbersome. Our processes are so automated, you know, when we've got close to 88,000 now to try to manually manage that, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All or nothing.
If I can just add one more comment, just to offer my opinion in agreement with what Director Huang mentioned in her comments. I personally don't know that moving to monthly billing is going to be the catalyst for changing a customer's behavior to auto pay. That's just my opinion. I think we should look at all the different ways where we can encourage them to move to auto pay, but I'm not sure that I'm seeing kind of the nexus between monthly billing and moving to auto pay, because we have that option already. Bi-monthly billing is still a regular bill. That's just my take, just because it came up again.
6 less checks a year.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to imply that it would get everybody to switch, but I think for some people it could make the difference to provide that motivating factor.
Okay.
So just wanted to, before we leave this topic, wanted to turn back to our public and just see whether or not we have a telephone caller. And just to make sure there's no other comments from the public, for our member of the public who's on a telephone, the instructions for how to participate in the meeting using your telephone dial pad are on the agenda, in the very top of the agenda. Just as a reminder, you can hit *9 on your dial pad to raise or lower your hand, and you can hit *6 to mute or unmute yourself and speak when you're invited to do so. So please don't hesitate to raise your hand. Okay, well, we appreciate the board's feedback. You know, these are tricky issues, and we definitely wanted to take the temperature of the board on this. Obviously, things like this are obviously very much customer intensive, and as a representative of our customers, it's helpful to hear your feedback. We will put some additional information together, but we do have a little bit of time. So thank you very much, Katrina. Okay, so item 4.3 is the headliner for this evening. This is to review our mid-cycle updates to the current fiscal year and next fiscal year budgets. And again, I'll turn it over to Mr. Wunderlich.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Yeah, so this is the main item for this evening, and the district has a 2-year budget cycle. Approximately this time last year, we adopted a 2-year budget covering this fiscal year and the next fiscal year. It's our standard practice to do a mid-cycle review and consider amendments for the year 2 budget. And so that's what we'll be doing this evening, is reviewing where we're at. And so if we could bring up the presentation, we don't plan to do a detailed review of the first 20 to 25 or so slides. Those just provide a general overview of the district, as well as some of the goals and accomplishments of the various work units within the district. You know, that information is available in the public record in the presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions on that material, but I was not planning to specifically cover it. So if we could just move through to a few slides. Let's see. Let's go back one more. So we will be looking for board guidance in a few different areas this evening. One, of course, is any specific feedback on staff's work goals or objectives for the coming year, as well as budget assumptions, any specific feedback on the operating budget, as well as the CIP and the financial planning model review. And so those will be distinct sections of the presentation, and we'll be glad to take your feedback as we go throughout the presentation this evening. We go to the next slide. You know, the budget is really sets forward our operating plan for the coming year and really reflects really the main things we're trying to accomplish here, which is our commitment to customer service, our commitment to being forward thinking about what challenges we have in the future and being prepared for them, but also our commitment to being transparent and prudent and responsible with managing our budget and our costs. All right, let's go to the next slide. And I think, you know, kind of with that over, we can keep going. Keep going. Yeah, I think with this, we can probably hand it over to Martin Coran, our senior financial analyst, who's going to start with our budget assumptions and operating budget review. And so I think that's about somewhere in slide 20 to 25 range where Martin will be picking up.
Thank you, Mr. Wunderlich. Good afternoon, members of the board, staff, and public.
Martin, you'll probably need to like get that mic
Sorry.
close to you if you can.
Stand like this. It's like dancing with my wife.
No, that's bad ergonomics.
No.
So, thank you, Mr. Wunderlich, for the introduction. Good evening, members of the board, staff, and public. Jumping right into it, we are in the 2-year budget circle of life, as we like to say, and we are now at the orange stop. So the May mid-cycle budget workshop. So the budget is driven by major assumptions and planned activities identified above, mainly prudent investments in infrastructure, such as AMI and main renewals, continued evaluation of water supply initiatives, such as Delta Conveyance and Los Vaqueros expansion, and continued aggressive funding of pension and retiree health benefits to achieve full funding by June 2032. So this fiscal year has seen significant cost increases, which is leading to reserves being spent down faster than anticipated. There's $3.7 million overall in construction cost increases, and the AMI project completion has been accelerated. It's going to be completed soon. There's also $6 million of additional SFPUC water purchases required due to facility outages and meeting water quality targets. In addition, $2 million of new ongoing cost of water due to SFPUC's unexpected 8.8% wholesale water rate increase, combined with lower water demands, leading to a revenue loss of about $4 million. So other key assumptions to keep in mind: labor and benefit costs are consistent with the current contracts, as you know, including a cost of living adjustment of 3.14% effective July 1st. And in order to maintain effective operations and financial capacity, we assume a 5.5% water rate increase next fiscal year. So with revenues down and costs up, the district has and continues to mitigate costs. First off, staff works aggressively to secure grants and reimbursements. The AMI project will provide long-term cost reductions and operating savings. Construction of the new PFAS treatment facility will minimize future SFPUC water purchases, and the Clean Energy Program is targeting reduced electrical costs. And also, new hires since January 2019 are enrolled in a defined contribution retiree health benefit plan. Of 73 current employees are in that plan. To better implement the district's goals, the district is proposing some staffing changes. I will highlight the key staffing changes being proposed. First, in the Office of the General Manager, adding 1 intern and converting a defined term public affairs position to a permanent position to enhance community engagement. Within engineering and technology, adding 1 IT analyst position to directly support data-driven business applications, and adding 5% to the Chief Information Security Officer position due to recruitment challenges. Within operations and maintenance, they'll be adding 1 defined term treatment facilities operator to support the startup and operation of the new PFAS treatment facility. Within finance and administration, be removing 5 vacant defined term meter reader positions due to the completion of the AMI project. Reclassifying the meter reader supervisor to a customer account field supervisor, and converting the defined term customer service rep to a permanent position to support the proposed transition to monthly billing, as was discussed in the prior presentation. There's also a 5% salary adjustment to the health and safety officer due to the new risk management duties he's taken on. Within water resources, proposal is to convert 1 defined term water conservation specialist to a permanent position consistent with the adopted water efficiency master plan. And adding 1 defined term engineer hydrologist position to cover the casework and regulatory work in order to free up engineers for other priorities. So all of this results in a net reduction of 2 positions. So going from 244 to 242 full-time positions.
Yeah, and if I could step in here quickly, given our recent discussion on monthly billing, my thought process is what I would suggest is we've proposed converting 1 defined term to permanent, simply retain it as a defined term position, kind of subject to a sunset pending a board decision on monthly billing.
Thank you, Mr. Wunderlich.
Comments on this, or do you have your proposed staff changes? You are going next into, this is the proposed staff changes. Why don't we do that?
Did you have?
I have some comments on this slide, if I might.
Sure.
We are seeing a continuing decline in water consumption. AMI, one of the advantages of AMI is that it generates at least a 5% to 7% increase in the amount of water that we're actually monitoring and measuring for sale. Same level of consumption, but a 5% greater commodity. And yet our demands have not increased this last year. We don't need more water conservation. We're well below the state's criteria and guidelines for the amount of water consumption. And the development in Fremont is primarily multifamily. They approved a project for Central Fremont, 8-story apartments, 126 units per acre. That's not going to be that was done on Tuesday at the zoning administrator, not even going to council or planning commission council, not even knowing about the project. I'm being surprised, but that is the pattern. That's going to be the development of our town. So we're not under any state mandate or incentive to lower our water consumption. We're not seeing it among our customers. So why are we adding personnel to water conservation? In this case, so I was a no vote on the, when we voted for an augmented water conservation plan, admittedly during the drought, but maybe we need to rethink that. Finance administration. I believe there's a potential, as I mentioned earlier, for savings in the way we operate our finance. We don't need to spend $130 an hour labor to chase a $25 delinquency. And when you raise that, you may open up 1 or more positions that can be transferred over to the monthly billing. The This last year on then we have the split, and I keep raising it, but it came up again in our last finance meeting between fixed and service charge. Last year, we had a drought surcharge. That was a fixed charge on the bills that brought in about $10 million. This year, drought over. Conservation actually continues, and that trend continues down. We're $10 million short on our financing. The argument was made that we could, that would balance out because there's a certain percentage of water. That's not working. So I would encourage us to look at the transition from last year to this year, that $10 million fixed charge, which is now gone in this year's budget and reflected by and not covered by increased consumption, that we look at increasing the rate of the service charge to match it. Currently, we are overcharging on our commodities by at least 100% and undercharging on our service charge to offset that. That is not a professional way to run any enterprise. Well, thank you.
Yeah, and we will, as you know, we'll have a long summer ahead of us with regard to rates, and that will certainly be an item that we'll be talking about. I did hear a question though in your comments about, why would we entertain converting a defined term water use efficiency specialist to a permanent? Hey, we're not under a particular standard to be enforced by the state right now, and I think that's probably worthy of a response, just to make sure that the board's clear. We do have new regulations in place. Currently, we're meeting them, but as you know, over time, they ratchet down. And we do project that at some point, we will not be able to meet the water use per capita standard. And the position that's being discussed here is part of the water use efficiency master plan, which is designed to try and make sure that we're achieving those standards, and also just trying to do the right thing in terms of our supply reliability.
Well, I would argue the development pattern is shown by yesterday's motion, which will be the new pattern for downtown Fremont, 126 units per acre. None of those units will be paying an individual water bill. It'll be a master meter for the entire complex. And that is the development pattern. So it will more than override any future changes in the state guidelines, and we will be well under the per capita cost. And then 40% of the units in this complex are going to be studios. How much water is used in a studio versus an apartment? Unless I expect there'll be some families crammed into some of those studios. They're all rentals.
Yeah, and we do a lot to try and project what demands will be over time, given those types of factors, right? Development density, general plans, and so forth. I mean, that's what our planning is based upon. And I wonder maybe if Ms. Heides has more to add.
Sure. So the water use efficiency program, as Mr. Stevenson mentioned, we do have the ongoing targets that we are going to have to meet. And so we're gearing up to be able to do that. And so would you like me to provide sort of an overview of what we're thinking for this vision here, or a specific question about the development?
Well, it's just generally our guidelines we're using for future development, particularly are we going to stay well under. Another development to look at is the Bridgeway development in Newark. There's almost no landscaping at all in that project. There's no parking on the streets because they've jammed it in, but the density of 3-story square box units where they can put as many as 4 families in each condominium because of the way they designed it with oversized units is a Lennar project, but it's the future. And those are establishing the patterns. And when you throw those factors into what our future is going to be for water, the water consumption per capita will by nature drop dramatically. we're not, I see no risk at all that we will have a government mandate telling us we need to conserve more water.
Okay.
That is the pattern we've seen in this district. And overwhelmingly, it's going to be high density multifamily.
Right, okay, thanks. That helps put it in context a little bit more. So yes, the future development, we do expect to be lower per capita use. At the same time, we still do project out our long-term needs based on all of that development, building on what is existing. And so as we're projecting right now, as Mr. Wunderlich mentioned, we are seeing that the demand forecast is coming down to some extent. We're going to continue to keep tracking that. We're also at the same time tracking how we're doing on our water use efficiency and how much savings we're able to achieve. And part of our water efficiency master plan was projecting out what that looks like for the long term. So what we're doing right now is looking at, where we kind of converge and get to a point where we won't be in compliance with the future water use efficiency objectives, which are being finalized this year. So that is still a ways out, but we do see that there is a point at which we will, even with demands coming down per capita, we still have existing demand that we're working towards chipping away at. So there is a point at which we will still be out of compliance. So I do just want to be clear on that. We're going to keep evaluating and reevaluating our demand forecast every couple of years because that is a major factor in that. But right now we're still planning to do our best to be on target to not be past those objectives into the future.
There's a radio advertisement for a company that says planning is a process, not a product. And as this process continues, I think and just start doing the projections. Our past model needs to be revised with the incredible increase in capacity and densities and the corresponding, because the metric is per capita, not total amount of water. There's a lot of water out there for us to get.
Well, and I just want to,
we're not water short.
I just want to comment on one thing. There is the per capita portion of the water use objective calculation, but there's also, allowances for how much outdoor irrigation you have and commercial industrial. So there's a number of different factors that play into our overall water use objective that we'll have to meet. So it's not only based on per capita.
We have a policy and hopefully one we will maintain. We'll let the cities do the planning, but we'll find the water for it. And that water is capacity supply is really not unlimited. We have all of M&I is only 9% of the state's water supply. There's a 91% or 89% that we still have potential access to, even though they give 50% to the environment. But ag will pay 10 to 100 times more for the same water. It's there in quantity. Water supply is not an issue. If the metric we need to follow is per capita, that's being resolved by the cities and their development practices. And incredible densities of 126 units in an acre. Thank you.
Director Akbari? I see it.
I'll make a comment. It came up in Ms. Morgan's comments a little bit earlier on our cybersecurity readiness. And I just wanted to go back to slide 29 where we discussed increasing the potential salary range for a new chief information security officer position, which I know we've been recruiting for that for some time now. I know that we're contracting with another organization that provides us with the CISO, but just because it came up in public comments, Mr. Robo, do you mind just kind of telling us a little bit about what our cybersecurity readiness looks like and how quickly we think we might be able to fill this CISO position?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Akbari. That's a good question. So the district has multifaceted, multi-pronged cybersecurity preparedness approach, one of which is having the proper staffing levels to train staff, develop and implement policies and procedures that are appropriate for the district, and also conduct regular penetration testing and assessments. So we see the Chief Information Security Officer as a critical piece of that. And we have tried to hire for that position starting about 2 years ago, but the market indicated that where we set the position salary is not commensurate with what we're seeing out in the market. So we are trying to make that adjustment and re-advertise for the position. But in the meantime, we have not neglected the fact that we need that service, and we've gone out and hired a consultant to serve as a virtual CISO that provides maybe not the whole service, but the key pieces of that service, including gap assessments and review of documents and policies and procedures. So we're doing what we can, and we feel that we are in a very good place, and we will continue to improve our cybersecurity posture. But there's always, more to do.
Thank you.
Well,
No questions. Just very happy to see that fruit of the AMI program, the removal of the 5 vacant defined term position. It's actually really nice that I think that was part of the savings that we are hoping to get with the AMI implementation. So thank you.
and before I'll go further, I'll get to Kelly A. You have your hand up. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, on the water billing, I think that this is classic. The idea of what's happening here, where the management or the government regulators put out standards, and then the utilities or whoever will work to achieve those particular standards. And then in this case, it's what per capita water consumption. But in reality, of course, these new buildings that they're building, a lot of the new urban developments, their consumption is minimal, and basically it would be fine to just give everybody free water for free or for flat rate or whatever. It wouldn't make any difference in terms of real conservation. But it would destroy the main principle of water utilities that water utilities have been moving towards for 50 years, which is universal metering to encourage conservation and equitable billing based on actual usage, and and getting away from flat rate water billing. And we're going back to it in this flat rate water billing by not having meters in place at each individual customer. And that's a big mistake, because we've been working towards, the utilities are working towards this idea of you are getting charged for what you use. And if you use more, you're going to pay more. And if you completely dump that idea, it's a theological sin of water utilities. It's a cardinal sin. It's very bad. It should be a capital offense, is what it should be. We need to have meters on everybody, not because it's going to conserve any water, because it won't, but just because it preserves the spiritual and theological rules of water utilities. Thanks.
Yeah. Morgan, any comment? I don't see your hand up, but ask. Okay. Kelly A's back up. Are you commenting, or you just put your hand down? There you go. Okay, well, I don't really have any, it is what it is here. I would like to point out that there are differences among the board members regarding some of the comments that were said this evening regarding fixed charges, but they're not for tonight. They're not for this part of the meeting anyway. So I will abstain from adding that. I just wanted to make for the record, though, that there are differences. Thank you. Okay, moving on then.
All right, now we're jumping into the numbers. Just to get your bearings, all the finance slides have the same format, showing the 2 prior years actuals, fiscal year 22 and 23, the fiscal year 24 budget, the estimate for this fiscal year, what we expect to come in at, and then the budget the original adopted budget for fiscal year 25 and the new proposed amended budget for fiscal year 25. So the table above shows the current projected financial status of the general fund. And as you can see, the district is spending down its general fund balance. Please notice that fiscal year 24 expenditures are expected to exceed the approved budget. And the board did approve at last week's board meeting the reserve appropriation to cover the overspending amounts. We are buying more SFPUC water and completing the AMI project sooner than anticipated. We'll get into more of the details as we continue along. The clicker died. Thank you. So as you know, water consumption is the main driver for our revenues. The chart above compares total consumption for this current year, shown as the dark green line with the square markers, for the 5 prior years and the major drought year, fiscal year 2016. As you can see, this year, fiscal year 24 has been performing about 5% better year to date compared to last year at this time, but it has not kept pace with budget assumptions that we developed for the budget last year. So for comparison, just comparison purposes, this current fiscal year is still 13% higher than the drought year in fiscal year 16. Next slide, please.
If I could, just a quick note. We see the FYE 24. That is with AMI. That AMI number is 5% higher than than comparison to the others because we have that much better reading of our water consumption. We're picking up the low flow rates. So in truth, if we were to compare it to the other charts, it would drop another 5% and be below the lowest of a historic. So here we are, drought over, plenty of water, no drought in California at all, and our water consumption is at an all-time historic low. And if we were to do a true comparison between the actual amount of water that is being consumed by the consumer, because we're recording more of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And one other quick point I wanted to make on this slide is if you notice the years that are higher, it's fiscal years 20, 21, and 22. Those are, the height of COVID when everybody was home. So we actually had, significantly higher consumption during that time period.
And this is not per capita, this is total. So our
Yes.
population has increased. The demand is compounded even more. People are using far less water in all times. That's why the bizarre rate structure we have doesn't work. Thank you.
Question on the graph. I noticed that the projection slope does not reflect the projection slope from 2023.
You're referring to fiscal year 24?
Yeah,
dotted
it's
line?
Fiscal year 24 dotted line relationship to the fiscal year 23.
Correct. That in fact, Director Gunther, it's not an estimate for the rest of the year. It's just simply specifically pointing out that's where we are right now in April. I'm just I'm trying to point where we are in April because it's really hard to see. I apologize. The graph itself is really busy.
No. Okay, I see. That's
Yeah.
not a projection. That's
Correct,
just
it
where
is
we
not.
are. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
No, that's quite all right. That's nice to know.
Right, so total revenues. Overall, fiscal year 24 revenues are expected to come in about 4% below budget, mostly due to lower demands than anticipated at this time last year. So for the amended budget fiscal year 25, total revenues are expecting to decrease 2%, again, mostly due to lower water demands. I'm only going to touch on water revenue here on this slide, but forecast demands are now estimated at 31.5 MGD for this fiscal year. We had budgeted it at 33.64. It's forecast to be 33.02 MGD next year. We originally thought it would be 33.64. And then it'll come into land what we think is the new normal conservative level of 34.32 MGD in future years. This is a reminder, when we were here for the budget last year, we were expecting the new normal to be 36.03 MGD. And we also assume rate increases of 5.5% in fiscal year 25 and 26, 5% in fiscal year 27, and then 4% rate increases in fiscal year 28 and thereafter. You'll see that more in Mr. Elm's presentation for the financial planning model. This is simply the graphic version of the previous table that illustrates the overall expected revenue changes from either year and budget compared to actual for this year based on the most recent assumptions we already discussed. It's just the pretty picture with colors. So since the district cannot control the weather or customer behavior, we wanted to show a comparison of budgeted versus actual water revenues for the last 10 years. So budgeted water revenue is the red line, and the actual revenue received are the blue bars. So budgeted revenue over the last 10 years was $1,015.3 million. Actual revenue over that same time frame was $1,009.4 million. So over the 10 years, the estimates have been higher by a total of $5.9 million, which amounts to $590,000 per year, or 0.6% of the budget. So this is an accuracy rate of 99.4%. So district staff continues to work hard to pursue additional funding opportunities. You'll notice the totals on the far right don't total up if you were to count all the way across. They're only counting fiscal year 22 through 25. We're taking out the budget years 24 and 25. So it's actual 22, 23, estimated 24, and the amended 25. So there's $2 million, as you can see, for the AMI grant. And we were originally expecting $1.5 million last year and $500,000 this year. The actual last year, we didn't get the $1.5 million. We are now expecting all $2 million this year because the AMI project has ramped up so quickly. And staff is actively drawing down on those grant funds. There's also, if you notice, for Prop 1 brackish groundwater reclamation, $1.1 million. This, just as a reminder, it's a 50% cost share grant through the State Water Resources Control Board for the groundwater grant program. And then $536,000 is expected for the RD1 fish ladder, and the drawdown is in its closing stages. Just as a reminder, we have a grants team that works very hard to try, they're constantly working on getting new awards. So you'll see some more eventually.
Actually, Martin, if you don't mind, it's probably an opportune time to just mention something that nobody else knows, because I got word moments before coming to our workshop today. But we've been reaching out to some of our legislators about community project funding, and just heard back from Congressman Swalwell's office that our request for funding for our PFAS facility has been accepted by his office. Doesn't mean it's a for sure thing, because there's lots of requests in play in Washington, D.C., but that's a really, really positive sign. I've been talking with a number of my peers, and I'm hearing a lot of denials of various requests. Times are tight. So to have that support from Congressman Swalwell's office is really, really encouraging. It's not on the list on the prior slide, but these things move fast. So just thought I'd mention that.
That's great news.
Yeah.
All right, total expenses. Total expenses for all funds are estimated at $6.3 million above budget this year, mostly, again, as a result of increased water purchases and shifted capital project schedules. So comparing the fiscal year 24 estimated and the fiscal year 25 amended budgets with the adopted budgets for fiscal years 24 and 25, the changes are: capital projects are up $8.7 million. Our capital program over the next few years will be described by our project engineering manager, Ms. Gunther, in the CIP section coming up. Water purchases are up $8.8 million, as we already discussed. And chemicals, there's actually a savings. This is some good news. A savings of $1.4 million this year, and expected to be down another $800,000 next year and ongoing, as the COVID price spikes have reversed and hopefully stabilized. For administrative in general, on that line item, there's actually two stories going on. The line items that make up that specific line are actually lower overall. However, expense credits play a significant role in that particular line. So expense credits have been on a steady decline since fiscal year 2019, and they decreased significantly during this fiscal year 24 as a result of the fringe and overhead rate decreasing from 165.6% to 152.7%. So this impact has a significant impact on the administrative and general line. But please notice the A&G is only $500,000 higher this fiscal year, or excuse me, in fiscal year 25, it's $500,000 higher than it was in fiscal year 22. And then expense projects are up there. We're expecting it to decrease $1.2 million. So above are the actual and estimated cash balances for all funds for the beginning and ending of each fiscal year. And since last year ended better than we originally estimated, this year started off on better footing. So taking into account the revenues and expenses we already discussed, we expect to finish fiscal year 24 at $10.2 million lower than the adopted budget projected at this time last year. The ending balance in the amended budget for fiscal year 25 is projected to be about $6.8 million below this year's estimated actual.
I have a quick note that $10 million is remarkably similar to the $10 million drought surcharge that we dropped off the table this year. We had for last year. Our temporary fixed charge boost. Thank you.
So this next slide shows the district's reserves based on the reserve policy approved by the board last June. The main takeaway here is reserves continue to meet or exceed the established targets. And as mentioned before, debt coverage is well above the 200% target. Above now, we have a more detailed breakdown of operations and maintenance expenses. These costs are highly dependent on water purchases, power, and chemicals, which can fluctuate widely from year to year. We'll get into the details in later slides, but please notice that the fiscal year 24 estimated actual is trending higher, as is fiscal year 25, mainly due to cost increases in water purchases. Administrative in general, here you get the detailed breakdown of what we discussed in one of the prior slides. If you look at the overall, each of the line items, they are lower overall. But the expense credits, again, the fringe and overhead rate has decreased significantly. And if you see that expense transfer line near the bottom, we were expecting 33.8 million in fiscal year 24, and now the estimate is 31.4 million. If you look at fiscal year 25, we were expecting 34.9. Now it's going to be 31.7 million. Yeah, so A&G expenses, and the expenses up here, these include district-wide benefits for all employees, and those are expected to come in below budget for this year because the expenses are based on actual staffing, right, actual costs. And fiscal year 25 amended budget is 1% below this year in the adopted budget. Fiscal year 24 and 25 estimated savings in pension and medical premiums are mainly as a result of actual staffing being below budgeted full staffing. So increases in the proposed budget years are based on full staffing, the aggressive pension and OPEB payoff schedules, as well as medical cost inflators identified in actuarial reports. The next two charts illustrate the percentage breakdown of the total general fund labor costs by cost center, including capital projects, customer capital contributions, and debt service. This chart shows the total general fund estimated budget or estimated actual for fiscal year 24 at $178 million, of which labor is 33% of that total. So notice the solid parts of the pie are showing specifically the labor. And then the shaded ones are the other costs within those particular categories. So this chart just simply shows next year, the fiscal year 25 amended budget, general fund of $186.1 million, of which labor is 32% of the total. Here are some details on labor expenses by cost center. So the fiscal year 24 estimated actual is based on actual staffing, and the amended budget year is based on full staffing with the modest 3% vacancy savings rate built in. Employee benefits specifically now are summarized above. The current year fiscal 24 is based on actual staffing costs. Next year, again, based on full staffing. The main takeaway here is annual pension and OPEB costs are consistent with the board's actions to aggressively fund the associated unfunded liabilities. This leads to improved actuarial performance and a quicker payoff. This chart shows authorized positions, vacancies, and retirements since fiscal year 18. Just for your reference, in fiscal year 15, the district had 238 full-time positions. It dropped to 230 and is now at 244, 10 of which are defined term. There are 18 vacancies so far this current fiscal year, and those are above average of the previous 5 years. Prior average was 16. So purchase water. In fiscal year 24, cost increases resulted from higher than expected reliance on SFPUC supplies versus the planned use of lower cost alternatives. This year is projected to end with an additional 3,050 acre feet of SFPUC purchases, costing $6.4 million. Several factors have contributed to the need for this additional SFPUC use, including unplanned or extended facility outages, the winter surface water treatment challenges, and use of additional water to meet water quality blending objectives. The power budget is based on two major factors: water demands, which we've already discussed, and PG&E rates, which we've also already discussed this evening. Annual increases in energy costs are driven primarily by rate changes. PG&E changes their rates, usually increasing 2 to 4 times per year. January 1st of this year saw overall electrical energy rate increase of approximately 15%, and there was another 2% increase April 1st. But from this time last year, electricity rates have increased by approximately 20%. All district accounts have been impacted by the electricity rate increases. And pumping energy costs are strongly tied to water demands. In turn, water demands such as irrigation are strongly influenced by the weather. Chemicals are required to treat raw water to drinking standards. Lower facility rates and extended facility outages have resulted in lower than projected chemical use this year. Chemical expenditures are anticipated to decrease next year, largely due to lower chemical costs that already discussed. And the district just as a reminder, the district participates in a regional consortium to ensure the best possible pricing for chemicals. All right, 2 more slides with me. The slide above shows the district's debt service and outstanding debt. This is according to the official debt service schedules. The schedule shows the 2012 bonds being paid off and the 2022 refunding bonds taking their place. Annual debt service is $5.9 million and expecting to increase to $7.6 million next year with a possible bond issuance. We'll see a future bonds line, fiscal year 25 amended of $30 million. All right, this last table shows the district's capital expenditure totals by funding source. As you can see from those totals, the capital program is intensifying. And with that, I would like to hand it off to our project engineering manager, Ms. Reka Ipagunta, to discuss the district's capital improvement program.
Maybe before we complete the handoff, we can stop and see if there are any questions or comments or feedback from the board on the operating budget that we've just reviewed.
Well, we have the extraordinary benefit of having a well-funded operation, the reasonable margins of someone might even argue excessive in some environments. So we are well positioned. We don't have a economically disadvantaged customer base in large numbers, so we're able to do a lot of good things. I just would hope that we would start to structure our budget so we match variable cost to variable income and fixed cost to fixed income, and much of the budgeting issues would would take care of themselves. Thank you.
So I have a couple of questions. First question, I know we've discussed this previously, but I thought it would just be relevant to ask again. On slide 47, regarding FTEs and retirements, when we look at the number of vacancies that we have, it's obviously significant. 24 vacancies when you have just over 240 employees is quite a bit. Is that because the hiring process is just taking longer? And I'm kind of posing this question to whoever wants to take it, but is that what's the reason behind having so many vacancies?
Yeah, I would say there's lots of different reasons from lots of different cases, but I don't know if the head of our HR division would like to take a first stab at that.
You're looking at
Which
me.
would be you.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a variety of factors, in terms of even if everything goes perfectly, it can still easily take, say 4 months to get through a recruitment. And that's with both on the HR side and the hiring manager side, with kind of everybody doing everything as quickly as they can. We do tend to have a fairly thorough hiring process. Now, that may feel like a long time to you, but I can assure you that other government agencies in this region, they would consider that lightning speed. And so, it's also, kind of dependent on timing in terms of when people are ready to move forward with recruitments. If I were to give you an example, our largest individual work group is the distribution maintenance division. We have approximately 35 staff at the staff level, utility workers in that division. Traditionally, they do one recruitment process a year because it's a very involved, intensive process. They have people come out and do actual like physical tests and things like that, right? And so if they happen to lose somebody, or there's a new hire that doesn't pan out for whatever reason, they may have a few positions that sit vacant for much of a year because of what's involved in that process. We're not doing like a new test every couple of months, right? And then also in a lot of cases, for example, last calendar year, we had 11 retirements. This year, so far 5. We do occasionally have other separations as well, but sometimes a manager retires and a supervisor is promoted to backfill for that manager, and then a staff person's promoted to backfill for that supervisor, and so on. And so one retirement can create a chain where maybe for a year or longer, there's a vacant position somewhere in kind of the chain of command in that unit. So as Mr. Stevenson alluded to, there can be a lot of different things going on. I don't find our vacancy rate to be out of line with what most other agencies see.
That's helpful.
And I would say that fiscal year 21 was abnormally low, where you can see 8, because you're talking about kind of the height of COVID, and what I think we saw was not a lot of movement with people leaving to go elsewhere. And even I know a lot of people are like, well, why would I retire? I can't go anywhere and do anything. So a lot of, so you had a great deal of stability during that year, but you can see, getting back to 18, 22, 23, that those are pretty normal numbers, and I think consistent with a lot of other agencies.
Yeah, and I'd also add that, when the job market is tight and the unemployment rates are pretty low, then there's a lot of competition out there for many of the types of positions that we have. And what we find oftentimes is when we go through that lengthy process that Mr. Wunderlich described, in a lot of cases, we'll get to the end, make an offer, and the person, what we find, they were kind of just using it as an opportunity to kind of improve their own position at their current employer. And so these things do tend to kind of drag on. And again, some of the positions that we have are really, really unique and just tough to fill to begin with. And we talked a little bit about the CISO position earlier. So, but I do agree that it's not way outside the norm, but yeah, it's the job market and the, competition changes all the time.
Yeah, and if it makes you feel a little better, 5 of the 18 vacancies are defined term meter reader positions that have been intentionally held vacant right now because of the progress in the AMI project. Right? So occasionally there are situations like that where it's also intentional.
How do we budget and account for interns?
So interns and other temporary staff are reflected within allocations separate from regular full-time positions. They are reflected in the budget and funds are budgeted for them.
But I've never seen a separate slide on that.
As I believe we have largely focused in these presentations on the full-time, regular benefited positions, yes. But the information is within the adopted budget, and we could certainly follow up with you to be a little clearer with what's included there.
Thank you.
My second question has to do with debt service on slide 51. I know we have another $30 million bond projected for fiscal year 25. What does that do to our funding ratio? What would that look like after we?
That is a great question, Director Akbari. And in fact, during Mr. Elm's portion of the presentation, he will be discussing that.
Okay.
So if you wouldn't mind just waiting until then.
Not a problem. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
It might be a good time to also just check and see if there are members of the public that have any.
I noticed
Comments.
Ms. Morgan is off now, down to the phone number and Kelly A.
Don't see hands up.
yet. I would like to make one comment. I think there's been several comments made regarding some of this differential towards the drought surcharge. I'd like to point out that seems like a large portion of this is the fact that the AMR project is finishing much faster than we expected. And our hetchy costs are much higher than where we expected. We couldn't have forecasted those sites because that came through with PFAS and the power cost. Those are costs that you can't foresee on budgeting. We took a shot this year, didn't work out. We're not that far off. We'll adjust. We do a 2-year cycle. This is why we do this. And we're going to adjust. Our process is not broken. So anyway, I think we're ready then to move on.
Yeah, and while the staff are switching up spots over there, I'll just add there are, a variety of factors. And I would expect, I appreciate the board's approval last week at the board meeting of the reserve appropriation of 10 million. That was being conservative. I'm hopeful we'll have enough savings on enough other line items that the amount of that we'll need to use will be maybe 5 million, something much less. And, we are down a little bit this year on the water revenue. The other place we're down quite a bit in revenue is development fees with our facilities connection charges. So that's, we're seeing a pretty big impact there this year as well. So with that, I will stop and I'll turn it over to Reika Ipagunta, our project engineering manager.
Okay, question before we continue on to the next step. Do we know approximately how long the next step's going to run?
Reka, any projections?
Just a projection.
Remember, a budget's just a plan, and sometimes the plan works out and sometimes it doesn't. So your projection could work out or not. It's okay.
I plan to present the information in 20 minutes and I'll be available to answer any questions.
Okay, we'll give it a shot. Throw for it. We want a break. Okay, yeah, why don't we take a break?
Sorry.
Is 10 minutes going to be fine? That would line up right about with 6 o'clock this evening.
Yeah, sounds good.
Let's go ahead and take a break. We'll re-meet at 1800, also known as 6 o'clock. It's 1802. And the meeting has re-adjourned from our temporary break. Go ahead.
Okay, good evening, President Gunther and members of the board and members of the public. My name is Rekha Ipgunta. I'm the project engineering manager. I'm pleased to share the intensive capital program and provide a status update on the program. Before we go into the details of the CIP update, I would like to provide some background. There is a CIP spreadsheet that's included in the handouts. Just a brief summary of what's included in the CIP. There is a lot of information in there. So I wanted to go through some highlights on what's included in the CIP summary.
And just for those members of the public that are online, the document that Ms. Ipagunta mentioned just now is available on our website under supplemental materials for this meeting, in case you want to follow along.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. And this has a lot of details, every single project and line item with our 25-year plan. But in a nutshell, we have more than 200 projects in our 25-year plan, totaling a value of approximately $1.8 billion. And we have tackled about 80 projects just this current fiscal year alone, totaling a remarkable $60 million. And in the next coming fiscal year, that number is going to go up to 90 projects for a total of $66 million. And these projects, they range in complexity and budget, but they all share a common goal of meeting our mission and strengthening our infrastructure. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. There are a few pictures that are included in the presentation. They showcase the capital improvements or investments we are making in our community. Most of these represent the investments we made in the last 12 to 18 months. So the one in the middle is a critical booster station that's aging, that certainly looks older than me. And we transformed that booster station into a 3-storied elegant pump station that's on the left-hand side. That's one of our capital projects we recently completed at Kurtner Booster Station. So today's presentation, I'll be presenting it in 3 sections. In the first part of the presentation, I'll quickly go over the CIP framework or CIP goals and provide a quick status update. And in the second section of the presentation, I'll provide an update on what's driving our CIP and some of the strategies we have implemented in executing our CIP. And then in the third section of the presentation, I'll go over some capital program scenarios and finally wrapping up with what kind of adjustments we made to the CIP to make it a sustainable and achievable CIP. The purpose of today's presentation is provide an annual update, and as we are going through this mid-cycle CIP update, provide a quick update on what we have accomplished in year 1, which is the current fiscal year, and then what we are planning in the budget year and what kind of adjustments we have made in the 2-year budget cycle. And I'll also touch on 25-year plan and then make a progress to the 3-year plan. So this is our CIP framework. The board has seen this slide several times. I do want to highlight a couple of things on this slide. There are 3 main components to our CIP framework. One is our 5-year strategic plan that provides strategic guidance on top initiatives for the district. And the second is our integrated resources plan. This is an assessment of our current water supply portfolio and also provides potential future opportunities and funding needs. I'd like to highlight that our 1995 IRP is outdated, and we started our effort in updating our water supply master plan. So we are in a transitory period between 2 IRPs. So our CIP has some placeholders, but the actual trigger for those projects will be guided through the IRP process. And then the third component on the CIP is engineering report. I do want to highlight that we are also the draft engineering report is in progress. We'll be bringing draft engineering report recommendations to the board for consideration next week. So at this point, we don't have any of those draft engineering recommendations included in the proposal that we are presenting today. So once the engineering report draft recommendations are accepted by the board, we'll be incorporating those into the future CIP updates. Okay, so as the board is aware, our financial planning model guides the funding requirements for the CIP, and the goal for this 2-year budget is a total of $120 million for fiscal year 1 and fiscal year 2, which includes current fiscal year and coming fiscal year. So I want to highlight a few things that we incorporated and provide a status on where we are today. Starting with the current fiscal year, we are making good progress on several projects. We have invested about 90% of the authorized budget through April for this current fiscal year, which is equivalent to about $52 million. And as part of the mid-cycle update, we made some strategic inputs or updates to our near term, which includes year 1 and year 2 budgets. That was mainly focused on the progress we made so far and any changes to our cost estimates to reflect the bids and current market conditions. Please note that our out-year projects are all preliminary, but we did apply escalation, 3% escalation to all out-year budgets. So that will bring the CIP to $2024. In other words, if we are building the entire CIP that's highlighted in the spreadsheet, it would cost about $1.75 billion to build all those projects in today's dollars. So this is a high-level overview of the changes that we made during the mid-cycle update. On a 2-year budget cycle, our budget increased by 6%, but overall, there is a 2% drop in our 25-year plan. As I go through the next slides, I'll explain where these adjustments were made. This graphic or chart represents our actual capital expenditures in the last 10 years. If you look at fiscal year 13-14, which is the first bar on the chart, that's an outlier for that duration. And that was tied to an important seismic improvement project the district implemented in that time frame, which was fault line crossings job that contributed to majority of the investments in fiscal year 13-14. Excluding that outlier, if you look at the last 4 years, our average investments were in the range of $45 million per year. That is 3 times increase in our investments in the prior 5-year duration. In the next few slides, I will explain what's driving our CIP and what are some of the approaches that we have implemented to make our CIP more efficient. So here is a highlight of some of the aspects that are driving our capital program. The chart that you see on the right-hand side, that's our the inflation. It's a consumer price index that reflects inflation. As you'll see that we all have experienced a record high inflation in 2022. The general standard inflation was somewhere in the range of 1.5 to 2 in 2021. It jumped to 8% in 2022, and then it's falling back. But the actual construction price, our bids are lagging the fall. They still remain elevated. So there are other factors that are contributing to capital program increases. So I'll highlight those. So the first one is the annual investments through project acceleration. There are several projects that we were able to accelerate, and I'll talk about some of the approaches that we implemented and how we were able to accelerate our projects in the CIP in the next couple of slides. And other factors that contributed to program increase in our programmatic investments are we have ramped up our main renewal program. So that's contributing a large portion of our CIP. And we are also making substantial investments in seismic improvements and upgrades to reservoirs. These includes seismic roof replacements at Alameda Reservoir and Dakota Reservoir, and Patterson and additional seismic enhancements. And we just discussed inflation and supply chain disruptions. This is an industry-wide issue, and we are no exception to that. So going back to program acceleration strategies, a few things that I would like to highlight here. We have identified high priority committed projects and programs and established targets and tracked core metrics on quarterly basis. This helped us steer the right projects in the right direction, and helped us keep those projects on schedule. And the board also authorized extended change order authorization to the general manager on large and complex capital projects up to 7% of the value of the contract. That's helping minimize project delays during construction due to unforeseen changes in the project. And we also, staff is coming up with some creative ways to mitigate supply chain disruptions. And this is, again, an industry-wide issue. We are seeing these in several areas, specifically electrical equipment is still very much impacted with supply chain disruptions. And also pipe material is another piece that is heavily impacted by supply chain disruptions. So one example the staff has implemented recently is on Risco main renewal project. The board awarded this contract a few months ago. And after the contract was awarded, we found out that the water main, the pipeline delivery is delayed by several months. Staff worked with the contractor and came up with a resequencing order to start with service line installations ahead of pipe delivery. Usually the pipe installation happens first and then followed by service line installation. So we switched the order in this case. So additional program acceleration strategies we have implemented in the last several months include consolidating our design contracts. For example, we consolidated Canyon Heights Booster Station design and Kirtner Booster Station, Washington Booster Station, all three under one design contract. This helped us apply lessons learned in real time on subsequent projects, and also reduced procurement administration of multiple contracts, and which enhanced our project management efficiency. So we applied the same technique on several other combination consolidation of projects so far, and that has proved to be successful. And a couple of other things that contributed to this project acceleration that I would like to highlight. The board approved or authorized incentive payments and pre-purchase of equipments to accelerate PFAS construction project. And we also are looking for other creative ways of taking exceptions to our standard equipment by finding substitutions for long lead items, and working with the contractor on inventory management and recovery schedule. This was very much helpful in advancing AMI project. So that concludes section 2 of the presentation. And before I go into the capital program scenarios, I can take a quick pause, see if there are any questions so far.
Questions?
We have a comment in one of the slides, extend change order authorization for the GM to minimize project delays. Would that be a board action? And it could be even broader in scope than this particular project?
Well, right now, what we're doing is doing it on a project by project basis, kind of depending on the nature of the project. And so we've got, I think, three.
We have three
projects?
projects so
Yeah.
far that we went with a 7% change order authorization.
Right. So really, this is kind of a pilot for us to try and see the degree to which it does help speed things along. And certainly for those bigger projects, it is helping to speed things along. For smaller projects, generally the change orders may not be as big to begin with, and I already have a fair amount of authority. But that is something that we consider. And as we learn from these larger projects that we're doing right now, we'll definitely be adjusting our recommendations going forward.
Okay. We open for general comments on the presentation and the handout.
I think the handout we can get to more discussion about after your next section, Reka.
Yes, we'll be going through some information in the handout as part of the presentation slides.
Yeah, so it might make sense to dig into the handout and after the next segment.
All right, that's fine. Thank you.
My comment was going to be on this same item that Director Weed brought up, just that I like the fact that we're trying to find ways that we can be creative with our projects. I know I came to the board a few months ago. The more opportunities we have to streamline the procurement processes and just try and get over any of these speed bumps, I would definitely be very interested in that. And I know staff is working.
It's very much in large part to the young lady you see standing before you and her team. They're just outstanding. They are not afraid to shake things up, try things that are new, and even take some risk in order to accomplish our overall objectives. And so they're doing a fantastic job.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to the next section of the presentation, capital program scenarios. I'll be presenting this in a sequence of starting with a 25-year overview of what changes have been made during the mid-cycle, and then progressing to a 10-year plan, and then I'll focus on the 2-year updates. Starting with the 25-year plan, the adopted budget was close to $1.8 billion, and the proposed budget is $1.75 million. As I mentioned in the prior slide, there's a 2% decrease in the overall plan. But as you see that there are programs that we consistently track, and the decrease is not coming from the programmatic investments. The main renewal program pretty much remains same. The $3 million that you are seeing, the increase is mostly with the application of 3% escalation to the overall program. Similarly, seismic improvements, there was a slight increase in the seismic improvement program. The primary reason is that we received bids on Alameda Reservoir. So using that cost information, we are updating our estimates for the subsequent reservoir projects, and the next one being Dakota Reservoir roof replacement project. We are adjusting our estimates to reflect the current bid conditions and market conditions. So that's the increase on the seismic improvements program, in addition to 3% escalation. Fish Passage, this used to be a huge program on this list, and now that we have completed major capital improvements for our creek facilities, what you see is the maintenance related activities to operate and maintain our creek facilities. So that's $2 million as needed investments for Fish Passage. And then the AMI project, the number that you see hasn't changed since the adopted budget. That's $62 million. Please note that that includes an ECHO project for the AMI. That's based on the life cycle of the meters. The life cycle of the AMI meters is about 20 years. So we incorporated an ECHO project for the AMI project. So including 3% in escalation, the overall program cost remains same. And then we do have other standard programs, service line and meter replacement project. There was a slight increase, again, due to anticipated meter replacements and service lines. That's an emergency related service line replacement. So we are tracking and estimating, projecting those costs based on the actual investment so far. Customer jobs, we have been seeing slight increase in customer jobs, so that was adjusted during the mid-cycle update. So we kept the changes to the CIP very minimal during the mid-cycle update. We have added a few projects, and these are required projects that we need to address as part of the CIP update. So some new projects that we have added to the CIP that the board has not taken any action at are Newark Old Town Streetscape Waterline Renewal Project. This is a collaborative opportunity that was brought to district from City of Newark. So we are planning to enter into a cooperative agreement with City of Newark to complete our main line replacement as part of the Old Town project. And we do have another facility equipment replacements and improvements, as I mentioned, for creek facilities for continuous maintenance and operation. These are all maintenance-driven equipment replacements. Canyon Heights Booster Pump Station for maintainability of the pumps and safe access to the pumps. There is a need to add a maintenance project in there. Curtner Tunnel Inspection Project, right after we completed Curtner Booster Station project, we noticed some leakage, some water in the tunnel, so we wanted to address that as soon as possible. So we entered a project to undertake a tunnel inspection. These are some of the adjustments we made to the current fiscal year. I'm not going to go through every single project on this list. The list of projects that you see on the left-hand side, those are the net additions to the program. And the ones that you see in red on the right-hand side are deductions. Overall, there is a net increase of $2.3 million in the current fiscal year. That's contributed by several project additions and deductions. So one thing that I wanted, there are multiple categories of changes that are happening in the CIP. But one thing I wanted to highlight is the advanced metering infrastructure project. You'll notice that we increased the budget by $8.4 million. Actually, the project is expected to be completed ahead of the anticipated schedule. So we are pulling in budget from the future year. So the net change to the project budget is zero. However, we are adjusting the budget based on the schedule of the project. And similarly, Alameda Reservoir Roof Replacement Project, we are advancing budget from future year. There is no change to the overall project budget. But however, there are some line items where we added new dollars to the program. One such example would be customer jobs. We added about $200,000 in service line emergency replacement is another example. And we did similar deductions to the same fiscal year. Again, based on the progress we have made so far and the schedule changes to the projects. This is a similar list of projects, but for the coming fiscal year, which is the budget year. There is an overall increase, estimated increase of $5.4 million to the coming fiscal year. And this is contributed by some additions that you see on the left-hand side and some deductions on the right-hand side. The main renewal projects, some projects that didn't advance in the last fiscal year are brought into the coming fiscal year. So that's the adjustment, overall adjustment to the line item at the programmatic budget, but there is no increase to the overall program. However, there were some other adjustments that we have made to Brackish Groundwater Reclamation Project based on the way the project is progressing. Those adjustments, the schedule-related adjustments are incorporated into the program. On the right-hand side, one example I want to highlight is Alvarado Niles small diameter. These projects have been reduced for some reasons. On Alvarado Niles, we put the project on hold for a grant decision. So we wanted to be reasonable with our funding request for the board. If we are not anticipating spending because of grant delays, we wanted to be cognizant about that. This is our 25-year CIP proposal, close to $1.8 billion. The three key takeaways from this slide. Our average investments in the near term are expected to be $64 million. As we have seen in the in the current fiscal year, we're already hitting 90% of the adopted budget. So we are confident that we'll be reaching the $60 million investment range in the near term budget cycle. And in the out year focus, and again, these are preliminary budgets, the average investment is expected to be $70 million per year. And I want to highlight a couple of out year exceptions here. One is we have included an alternative to Valsito's channel project, which is a pipeline option. That's an exception that you'll see that's pointed during the fiscal year 33-34. And we have removed a project from the CIP. The project is, the scoping of that project is heavily dependent on the guidance from the IRP. So that was the reduction that you see between the blue and red line, which is adopted versus proposed budget total. So that's a reduction to the CIP, which contributed to overall 2% reduction to the 25-year plan. And the third exception is the AMI project.
Excuse me, could you please, which projects are removed from the plan?
So we removed one project from the plan, which is Nile's intertie pipeline project, and I'll talk about that in the next few slides. So this is a graphical representation of how we are spending in relation to our district strategic goals. 94% of our CIP supports our district strategic goals 1 and 2. 77% of CIP, which is equivalent to $1.3 billion, is going towards goal number 1, cost effectiveness and value. And we have about 17% of the CIP is allocated for water supply and water quality, contributing to about $300 million. And the rest is for other capital projects, whether it's maintenance or needed infrastructure improvements. And 6% of the CIP is contributed to those other initiatives, including customer jobs. This is a representation of the allocation of CIP to improve reliability. So 77% of the CIP, proposed CIP will improve reliability, whether it's operational reliability, production, seismic, system reliability. So it's contributing to a major portion of the CIP is contributed towards increasing supply reliability. And we have about 18% of the CIP allocated for water supply and water quality, and the rest coming from customer jobs, which is 5% of the CIP that has no impact on rates. This is a chart showing the 25-year CIP allocation by funding source. The key takeaways from this slide, only 52% of the entire CIP is influencing or impacting our ratepayers. And the remaining portion of the CIP, which is about 48% of the CIP, is funded by developer-related charges, which is a combination of Facilities Improvement Fund and Facilities Renewal Fund. And we also have about 7% of the CIP allocated for extraordinary expense projects. These are identified on the capital program, and I'll talk about extraordinary expenditures on the next slide. So a quick refresher on capital versus extraordinary expenditure projects. Extraordinary expenditure projects are unusual, infrequent projects that will not immediately result in addition of a new asset or improving an existing asset or upgrading an existing asset. So if there is no asset involved in the project, that becomes an extraordinary expenditure. Some examples are our master plans, feasibility studies, pilot programs, and unplanned events to address any emergency events. All these come under extraordinary expense projects. Here is a list of the extraordinary expenditure projects that are included in the CIP. Some examples include our Los Vaqueros Reservoir expansion project for a total amount of $93 million, and our integrated resources planning. This is a planning document This effort will not result in any asset for the district, so this is categorized as an extraordinary expenditure project. Eventually, after the studies are completed, some projects will become capital projects. A similar example would be PFAS. We started PFAS project as a steady project, and now that's converted into a capital project when we entered into the treatment plant improvement project. This is another representation of.
Can I ask a quick question on this slide? I see that the vehicle capital line item and the zero emission fleet transition master plan are two separate items. Am I to take it that the zero emission fleet transition master plan is simply a planning activity on how we move to different types of vehicles and doesn't include any kind of
Right,
lease?
that is correct. That's purely a master plan effort to comply with the new regulation for clean vehicles by 2030, a portion of that by 2030, and then full compliance by 2036. So that's related to planning effort, and then the other project is related to leasing vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
So this chart represents 25-year CIP by program. The key takeaway here is nearly 50% of our CIP is allocated for main renewal projects. And we do have additional service line meters or standard programmatic line items, including service lines, seismic improvements, SCADA, and PLC upgrades. Are all contributing to the rest of the CIP, and there is a large portion, 1/3 of the CIP is for other capital projects, where I'll go talk about that in a bit. So some projects that make up other capital, these were already identified. Some of them are already identified on the extraordinary expenditure list of projects. These include Las Vegas Reservoir expansion, Valsitos Channel pipeline. These are not part of any of the programmatic replacements or programmatic infrastructure improvement projects, but those are standalone projects. So now I'm shifting from 25-year plan outlook to a 10-year plan. And in the next 10 years, what's our focus? So this is a 10-year CIP by program. If you remember in the past, our main focus has been on the fish passage, and now the fish passage dropped off the chart and new programs found their way into the chart. So AMI has been the main focus for a couple of years. I'm pleased to inform that that's getting to completion. We will be reaching the finish line in the next few months. And then the program, the CIP is shifting towards seismic improvement projects, which are our reservoir roof replacements and other seismic enhancements. And also we'll be focusing on main renewal projects. SCADA and PLC replacement is another project which is equivalent to painting Golden Gate Bridge. So that's a never ending, it's always a routine maintenance type of project. And we have other programs like customer contributions. We are always anticipating some expenditures on that. So here is a list of projects that we have worked on that are larger projects, larger complex projects, more than $500,000 worth of investment in the current fiscal year. As I mentioned, advanced metering infrastructure project made a huge stride, and we're getting close to completion on that project. That was one of the large projects that we have focused on in the current fiscal year. Similarly, a seismic improvement project at Alameda Reservoir, that's another large project that we focused on. That's also coming close to completion, and we expect to close that project in the coming fiscal year. And we completed Curtin Road Booster Station project, and the board accepted the project recently and at the May board meeting. So these are some of the large projects that we staff made a tremendous amount of progress on these large projects, and we continue to make progress on the remaining projects on the list. So these are the list of projects that we will be working on in the coming fiscal year. Staff is excited to work on these new projects. As I mentioned, the list is growing, so we'll be focusing on additional new projects in the coming fiscal year. So these are some of the projects that are greater than $500,000. To highlight a few, we do have significant number of projects in the main renewal. Lindsay Track, Driscoll will continue to be in construction. We just started Central Newark, and we have few other projects that we expect to go into construction in the coming fiscal year. So that summarizes the CIP and what's included in our CIP spreadsheet. There are a lot of projects. I tried to compile the information from the CIP spreadsheet to the best in a meaningful way. And before I wrap up the presentation, I do want to highlight a few things that we have implemented during the mid-cycle update. The primary focus is to keep the CIP sustainable and achievable. There are a lot of projects that we could work on. There is so much focus on other things that are going on that changes the landscape, but we have a well-defined criteria to add new projects to the CIP. So we only allowed adding critical needs that are important to focus in the near term. And then we deferred scope on some non-critical projects just to keep the budgets reasonable and justifiable. And we adjusted contingency amounts on some projects. One example is AMI. As AMI is getting close to completion, usually on our large capital projects, when we do the estimating, we have a contingency of about 10% to account for unforeseen changes during construction or change orders. In this case, we are comfortable removing that contingency as we are getting to the final stages of the project. So those adjustments have been accounted for during the mid-cycle. And we also made some other adjustments for customer jobs. And one other adjustment for Alvarado Niles Pipeline. This is one of the largest main renewal projects in the CIP. We delayed funding for the coming fiscal year while we are waiting for a grant decision. So in terms of overall reductions to the CIP, which goes back to, again, the 2% reduction in the 25-year plan, there are three projects that are contributing to that reduction. The first one is the Niles Newark Intertie Pipeline. The original proposal on this project was to bring water from desal to blender facility to either supplement or offset SFPUC purchases. The scope of the project is yet to be defined and finalized, and we are looking for some direction from the Water Supply Master Plan. So this is a significant budget commitment, so we wanted to make sure we have proper guidance before we include that in the CIP. So we removed that project from the CIP for now, but it may come back again, or it may come back in a different form, depending on what the future water supply portfolio is going to look like. And then another project that we had in the CIP was Quarry Lakes Parkway Improvement Projects. This is an effort that Union City has initiated, and that required water main relocations in the Quarry Lakes Parkway area. Staff negotiated funding with the city, and we were able to find alternative funding through city's project. So we are able to, this will reduce $4.5 million burden on the CIP. We'll still complete the project, we'll still do the project without burdening our CIP and our ratepayers. The third project is Los Vaqueros Reservoir Expansion Project. There were some adjustments that we made. The primary reason for the reduction in budget is this now reflects a delayed start of major annual expenditures in the CIP. These expenditures go for the entire 25-year plan. By delaying those major expenditures, the total impact, there was net reduction to the project. So with that, that concludes the CIP portion of the presentation today, and my sincere thanks to the board for supporting the CIP program.
See, go right, see Mr. Kelly Abrams' hand up. Like to go ahead, Kelly?
Yeah, well, with respect to the Los Vaqueros, it is nice not to have to spend money now, or delaying the money a little bit, delaying the payments. But I would point out that they have been raising their costs, let's say around 8% a year on average, over the last 7 years or so. So it's kind of maybe higher than inflation, their rate of cost increases. And they also delayed the expected completion of their project by 2 years, which probably is exactly why you would delay your payments to them, because they pushed it out from 2030 to 2032, so they're late. The state water project we were hearing about earlier, I'm just saying that the state, a lot of the other agencies' projects, big projects like the Los Vaqueros and like the state water project, that their things are their costs are rising faster. They're out of control. Their projects are being delayed, and it's worse than what ACWD has here. You know, this ACWD, by contrast, seems to be things are under control, and the budgets seem to be you guys seem to be well predicted. But for example, on the state water project, they said they were going to be delivering 50 or 55% of the allocations over a long-term average. And in the last 10 years, they've been delivering 37% allocations. And since they've been delivering less water, that probably forces you to go to San Francisco and buy their water, because the state isn't delivering really. So the inflation and the project management and project delivery schedules much worse for state water project and much worse for Los Vaqueros.
Thank you. Dr. Weed?
Yes, thank you. A number of comments. First, I think it would be helpful if we had a chart that showed the totality of the capital investments we're going to be making. We have the capital improvement project, but not on this list is the state water project, which is 21 billion and climbing, of which we're a little over 1%. The San Francisco PUC water supply improvement program and response to unimpaired flows, arguably in the $6 to $8 billion range, in which we're at least 4%. So that gives you a full concept, gives us a better concept of how much money is going into sorry about that. Is going into in order to support our overall operations and capital type expenses. Next, we have several individual projects. One is Los Vaqueros, which is a $93 million total. But there are 3 options of which this board has yet to make a decision on. I think it would be helpful if we showed the cost of each of the 3. One is the full participation with 10,000 acre feet of dedicated storage. The other is the Bethany transfer pipeline only. And the third is operational use of the reservoir in order to operate the, so those would be 3 distinct paths I'm told we can take, and some districts are looking at which option. That going back to the general concept, and that you put in the concept of a contingency, because there are things that we should probably put into our capital mindset and long-term budgeting, that there will be items that the black swans, particularly in the water quality world, like PFAS, which we cannot project out 25 years. So you throw in another dollar estimate, a percentage in there, of which will be realistically added on at the 5, 10, 20-year mark. So again, you have a better idea of what our total expenditures might be. I'm glad to see you drop the word recycled and now have alternative water supply. Kudos. And it may well be, we'll look at that. We have another water supply issue, and that is the potential acquisition of groundwater banking. Groundwater banking may well be a capital expenditure. In my mind, we're best to follow the example of Irvine Ranch, where they are purchasing land in order to have the control, and found that to be a better long-term investment than being a tenant and renting space as we're doing in semi-tropic. Big expense, be another number in there. I see you have about 60 million for the Vallecita pipeline. Great. You do not want open channel conveyance of water if you can avoid it. $60 million well spent. But we should also add to our list the acquisition of the Niles Canyon Aqueduct, which would allow us to bring state water all the way down to the quarries, lakes, the Munning Pit, without having to go into an open channel. We've learned the vulnerability and the extortion of the environmental community, as well as the vulnerability of open channels. So those are my primary thoughts. And on the Niles Canyon Aqueduct, we have an EIR that from the Park District, which is intentionally destroying the potential for using that aqueduct, which follows a pattern of denying acquisition to water resources. I would also include a project in there for the acquisition of watershed and pipelines, such as the N3 Ranch. It may be an unfunded, but it should be on our list as a potential that should become available again. We can get 3 votes. That would be a salvation from a terrible mistake in the past. Thank you.
To go through some of these questions, I think the last one, acquisition of watershed, we have a line item. Actually, we removed the budget that was originally intended for N3 Ranch during the negotiations. We still have the line item, but we currently don't have any budget, but certainly we can account for any new opportunities as
So
part
that
of
would be a list of prospective projects with no money behind them, but at least we include them on the chart so we don't totally forget them. All right,
Those
thank
are placeholders. That's the intent for now. And then going back to your question on SBA and SFPUC participation, those are not captured in the capital program because there is no asset associated with that we are going to own.
No, I understand that they're not here because they're not part of our own expenditures. We incorporate them in the rates we pay to these other parties, but in the broader mindset, this is money we're having to spend for capital investments, whether it be direct or indirect.
Okay, noted.
Thank you.
Going back to slide 76, there were going back to the specific line item I inquired about before about the zero emission fleet transition master plan. Maybe this is my just not understanding. $700,000 for that line item just seems very significant. And I don't know if you can respond to it right now, but it'd be helpful for me to just get a better understanding of what we expect that master plan will encompass and why it would be so significant. I don't know if you have a response now or if you want to follow up later.
The district has hired a consultant to help us with meeting and complying with the objectives of the zero emission fleet requirements. And that is related to the cost associated with preparing a master plan and the consultant services to help us prepare the master plan. Mr. Wickham may have additional thoughts about that specific line item.
Yes, thank you. This Director, Mr. Gunther is correct. We are developing a master plan, and that's going to include both our vehicles and the infrastructure to support them as far as for the zero emission vehicle compliance regulations.
Yeah, and if you're interested in more detail, we'll be happy to to provide more detail on that item, kind of break out the costs. My sense is this includes some work that's going on right now, and Ms. Gunther mentioned consultant services. We also have some staff dedicated to this. It's going to be a really big shift for the district. And one thing I'll note is that, we do have, a fair amount of money in the CIP related to future vehicle leases. It's probably not going to be enough once we figure out what the master plan is going to be, because we're seeing the cost of these vehicles when they become available are going to be really, really high. And so we have, we have a little bit of time to make finalize our master plan and make some adjustments to budget, but it's they're not going to be any cheaper than what we have in the CIP right now.
Okay, yeah, if you don't mind following
Sure.
up with me with just a little more detail, just so I can kind of understand what's being factored
Yeah,
into that.
Mr. Wickham heard you loud and clear, and we'll prepare a little bit more detail.
Perfect. The other two items that I'm just a little curious on are the software upgrades to Kayenta and CityWorks. I know I ask about these software upgrades anytime they come up. I always want to make sure that we're doing something that's modular and that's not actually a fork off of the traditional software. Is that the plan here with each of these upgrade plans?
Thanks for asking. Mr. Awoke's just going nuts, so it's good to get it out in the open.
Yeah, and as we talked about, an application is only as good as its updates and improvements, right? With cybersecurity, functionality, and so forth. So with respect to CityWorks, it's an upgrade that's needed every 5 years. We upgrade the system. We also, update our support services. So it's tied to the CityWorks upgrade and some of the improvements we've made with the permits and licensing module that we have incorporated recently. The Kayenta system upgrades, I think finance could speak more to that than I can, but essentially that's another system that's very essential to the district's core function. And it's been a while since we upgraded the core systems of Kayenta, but maybe Mr. Wunderlich has more comments on that.
Yeah, so my understanding of this slide is that it's showing us the budget over the entire 25-year CIP for these projects. Is that right?
That's correct.
Right. And so we would expect every 5 years or so to have money budgeted to update the version of Kayenta that we're on. And so so it wouldn't be like $1.5 million for a single upgrade, for example. But we have paused upgrades to Kayenta while we've been doing the AMI project due to the number of integrations as well as dual processes and, kind of additional workload on that specific work unit during the project. So I know we are planning probably within the next 12 months now that we are essentially done with the AMI project. 99.8% is basically done. And so we'll probably be doing an update within the next, 12 or so months.
Yeah, and
yes, it's all kind of the off the shelf, standard versions where we don't have like significant customization or anything like that.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah, and if I could add a quick comment, we are putting out an RFP for our IT master plan. So these are placeholders, but we will have a better idea of the technology needs and the resource needs as we go into the future.
Right, and just fundamentally, and I understand your question and why you ask it, and we are no longer believers in the customization thing, but I also don't want to, confuse anybody, because even though we don't do at least any significant customizations of software like this, we try and stay with the off-the-shelf software. There's still a ton of configuration that happens. These are all these sort of major enterprise systems are all highly configurable. And so there is still a fair amount of cost and effort that goes into implementing these and upgrading them because they're very configurable, but they're still sort of off the shelf.
That, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Just wanted to make sure that we're not going into a route of customizing the software and having issues with supportability and all of that.
Yeah, we've spent a fair amount of time in that world and don't like it. So that's not where we go anymore. So I did hear sort of, hey, look, I'd like some more information for the zero emission fleet. Master planning, city works and Kayenta, we'd be happy to do that. And it's great because right now you guys are distributing the homework across all of our executive staff team. It's great. Spreading the love. It's great.
Perfect. That answers all of my questions. So thank you.
So I think you guys answered my question regarding customization. So thank you very much. That definitely is a concern. And the other one is just a comment. I know you heard from some directors about adding projects to the CIP, but I just want to be clear that no new project will be added until the board is as a whole is comfortable with it, right?
On the engineering report recommendations, I just want to clarify. The question is related to no new projects added to the CIP.
Right. So for example, tonight, I think we have a recommendation about adding a project without funding behind it, such as the Niles Canyon Aqueduct or the watershed project, for lack of a better word. I just want to be really clear that these projects should not be added to our CIP unless the board as a whole decided that these are worthwhile projects to pursue. So that's just a clarification I want since it was a little bit confusing for me.
Noted, thank you.
Let me suggest, I mentioned the word contingency earlier, that we should have a dollar amount as we do with any capital project, but on a contingency for the plan. And maybe some attachment, but it would be a percentage overall, maybe 20% contingency is common, and list the projects that might be included in a future contingency, which would include water quality issues, which should, and that's huge. And they're hard to predict. You go on a 5-year cycle. The additional groundwater acquisition, watershed improvements, and the Niles Canyon Aqueduct.
Yeah, and that might be something we can look into. One thing I think we're always careful about is ensuring that that each project in the CIP, because there's a tie to our development fees, there's a tie to our general fund and our rates for many of these. We need to ensure that that there's a properly established project for any sort of line item in there. And so I don't think we'd be able to do just a line item contingency. What we do, as Ms. Ibagunda pointed out, we generally are applying contingencies in our individual project budgets and the line items, and those contingencies are generally associated kind of with the scope and the nature of the project. So things that are really complex or where there's changing regulation we don't really know, well, it'll generally have a bit higher contingency. Things that are well-known and routine will have a lower contingency. So we do it on a project line-by-line basis. But we can give that some more thought.
Hard to predict 25 years out. Like, with the exception of Director Akbari, I don't know that any of us might be here.
It's going to be all yours.
Okay, I think that I see Mr. Avery has also dropped off. I think we're going to head towards financial planning model now.
Yeah, just double checking once again with our call-in attendee. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to make any comment or ask any questions. But beyond that, if there are no further questions for Ms. Ibagunda, I think we can move on to the next segment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you, Ms. Upaganta. Thank you, Mr. Karan. Wonderful job. Good evening, President Gunther and members of the board, and members of the public. My name is Sidney Aum. I'm the financial analysis supervisor. So I have the responsibility of providing you the presentation on this part. So the proposed amended budget presented to your this evening for fiscal year 23-24 and 24-25 is a balanced budget. So that will come to you in June with any changes that you provide to us. For this part of the presentation, the board also reviews the financial planning model, which looks at the current fiscal year plus the next 5 years. So this is a long-range planning. It's part of the budget process. It's part of a long-range financial process. It's so the updated financial planning model includes changes, significant changes to our assumption, as well as changes that you already heard, as well as we will also be presenting some financial planning scenarios for you this evening. So we'll go through that. So I will start with the significant changes to the financial planning model. So there's a few. The water demand, you've heard a lot this evening already from different part of the presentation. So we're not seeing the increase in demand after the drought that we expected. So we're seeing a lower increase compared to budget adoption. Long-term demand estimates decreased by 1.7 million gallons per day. So we'll see that when I show the demand slide later.
May I suggest that's solely due to the AMI generating more, recording more water?
No, so I wanted to take a minute to provide kudos, kudos to our teammates at Water Resources. They spent a lot of times in looking at the modeling, looking at water demand. As Ms. Heides mentioned earlier, they're looking at this all the time. We did this for the budget adoption in June, so it's been a while. But between that time, they're looking at it on a monthly basis, weekly basis, look at the weather. We have experts in the field and staff. I really wanted to say that staff that handles the projection are very good at what they do, and they love what they do, and they're experts in the field. So based on the modeling, we're projecting that, but we'll see what the summer looks like, and we'll come back before we start the rates process to provide you an update on our forecast. You heard the updated costs for the current fiscal year for major expenditures. You heard about the capital projects, additional water purchase for SIPUC. So that's in the updated financial planning model. What's new, we also assume higher level of new debt. At budget adoption, the model assumes $45 million issuance, two issuances, 20 and 25 million. The updated model assumes $85 million over the planning horizon. That's adding $2.3 million to the existing debt service that you saw earlier, 5.9 million current debt service. So the 85 million over the planning horizon will add 2.3. And I will get to the impact on the debt ratios in a minute. SIPUC increased the water rate. We didn't expect that. So that add another 2 million on ongoing costs. And in addition, they also provided the estimate for the next 4 years. So those estimates are also higher than what they provided to us at budget adoption. So they keep changing the estimate. The 8.8% is not anticipated. We also include $25 million in grant and funding from outside sources in the out years. That's beyond the budget years. So 15 million of the grants is for the hazard mitigation program grant, and 10 million is the PFAS settlement. And before we programmed it in, staff considered this, both of them to be highly likely. So the final key change to the financial planning model is the next bullet. That's projected water rate increases. So the proposed amended budget for the fiscal 24-25 assumes 5.5%. So that's assumed in the amended budget. Beyond that, in the financial planning model, it also assumed a 5.5% increase the following year, and followed by a 5% increase in the third year. After that, back to 4%. assumed increase on an annual basis.
I suggest that 1 year we were given a breakdown of the annual increases between service and commodity cost. 1 year was of the increase, 95% was to go to service-related cost, only 5% to commodities. Unfortunately, the board retained its traditional inverted ratio. So I think it would be helpful if we look at it as it's projected out. We do see some commodity cost increases with SFPC and state water, but the real, as we saw with this capital improvement project, a program of almost $2 billion, it's going to be fixed charges that are going to be a major driver, and certainly far more than a third of the total rate increase. So thank you.
It's noted. Okay. So this is the impact. This shows the general fund ending balance of the impact of the assumption you saw earlier. We're showing the adopted budget and the amended budget. So at the budget adoption, the projected ending balance in the low year is $23.7 million below the reserve target. With the changes I described, and the last slide, the amended budget shows the projected ending balance at $600,000 below the reserve target. I wanted to note that the adopted budget slide you see in the out year, you did not see that last time because part of the financial planning is to look at the current year and plus the next 5 years. So when the board reviewed this in June of last year, you only saw it through fiscal year 2028. So right now in the amended budget cycle, we're showing that so our planning horizon is now through fiscal year 2029.
Let me suggest that on this chart, we see the same chart every year for as long as I've been on the board, showing that 5 years out, we're going to have a deficit. And yet every year in the near term years, we have a surplus. So that is a moving chart that, and there's something called the planner's droop, where you don't count on the longer term finances, are just not there, but they come to fruition in the short term. So hopefully we don't use that chart to make major decisions. It's 5 years out and we only have to make decisions on maybe a 2-year cycle on our budget.
Thank you for your comment.
Yeah, and I don't think there are any decisions that are being proposed or suggested this evening that tie our hands out and far out into the future. I would just point out though that we're 90% the way through this fiscal year. I think we have a pretty good handle on what the results will be for this year, and we'll be spending our reserves down about $35 million this fiscal year.
Lack of water sales.
Yeah, that's about 4 million of that.
So I may add that this also assumes full funding of capital program, full staffing, and so on. So this is the bill demand slide. As you see in detail, the adopted budget and the amended budget at the top. As I mentioned, we didn't get the rebound that we expected. You saw a little more hockey stick bump at budget adoption. Now it's more flat. So the current year estimate for the year-end projection for the current year is 31.77 MGD. So I think a question came up earlier on that. And long-term, as Mr. Coran mentioned, that we're looking at 1.7 MGD lower. Again, staff continue to look at this and provide an update on the water demand forecast. This shows the debt coverage ratios, the adopted budget versus the amended budget. So as you saw earlier during the Mr. Wonderlich's presentation, the district's total debt profile is much lower than the median as compared to other agency, and the district continues to have significant flexibility in issuing debt. That's in the plan. Speaking of issuing debt, I will just jump to the next slide. Want to jump to this slide for right now. So at budget adoption, the model assumed in the pink color budget debt issuance totaling 45 million, as I mentioned, in fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 28. In the amended budget, the first issuance is increased to 30 million. In the next fiscal year, that's part of the amended budget that's before you this evening. And the second issuance, 55 million in fiscal year 2027. So based on the schedule of the capital program, the model assumed different amount in issuance as well as the timing of the issuance. So I'd like to go back to this slide to answer Director Akbari's question earlier. So what is the issuance of $30 million in debt in the next fiscal year? What would that do to our debt coverage ratio? As you see the adopted budget and the amended budget, it would drop slightly in the fiscal year 24-25. The exact, based on a model, the exact number is 603% to 381%. So it's a drop, but as we said earlier, it's still very well above the 200% goal set by the board, and that covenant only requires 1.25. So lots of flexibility in issuing debt. That's why we included this debt issue and the amount and the timing in the long-range financial planning model. This metric shows the revenues and expenses, really looking at operating revenues versus operating expenses. Since the district operates like a business, this is a very good slide to look at in terms of, okay, does this district generate enough operating revenues to cover its operating expenses, including depreciation? As you noted on the top slide, the amended budget as being proposed, for a couple of years, the current and next year, the district will need to rely on non-operating revenues, such as property taxes, to cover its operating expenses, include depreciation. But starting in fiscal year in 2026, the operating revenue will be sufficient or projected to be sufficient to cover operating expenses, include depreciation. And similarly, this one looks at just the rate and charge revenue. Compare that to our revenue requirement, including debt service. That's the general O&M, operation and maintenance. Add that to the debt service. As you can see again, as the red, that just means that there's a delta, there's a variance. But again, the district relies on other funding sources, property tax being one, interest income being two. And for a couple of years, we also, the district also uses the accumulated reserve to cover or to meet a revenue requirement, as well as funding the pay-go general fund project. This slide you saw earlier, the key takeaway here is you see the trend of the capital program. You see various slides on capital improvement program. This one shows you by funding sources and general fund, pay-go general fund, and new debt. The pink there, and facility improvement fund, as well as facility renewal fund. So there are different funding sources to fund or aggressive general capital improvement program. This just laid that out here over the planning horizon. So now we get into, we wanted to discuss with the board or review with the board a couple of financial planning alternative scenarios. You saw earlier the projected ending balance is right where the target is. So there staff wanted to look at a couple of scenarios that would have direct impact on the projected ending balance for the general fund. And the first scenario is delay pension and OPEB funding. So the current plan in the amended budget is to maintain the aggressive funding for both pension and OPEB to get it fully funded in about 8 years, 2032. So this option is to delay that 5 years to get it to full funding, still full funding, by June 2037. That's a 5-year delay. This is a return to the funding schedule that was adopted based on the 2017 rate increase. In 2019, The change was to go from a 20-year to a 15-year. Now we're 8 years away to full funding, so this would delay 5 years. So delay would achieve an estimated 3.2 million in annual savings for pension through fiscal year 2032. And that would reduce the unfunded liability, the annual payment to $8 million. And on the OPEB side, it varies from a 0.8 or 800,000 reduction to $1.8 million reduction, and reduced the unfunded liability annual payments to 1.9 million. So changing from the aggressive payment schedule, delaying it will achieve savings. As you see there, the total cost reduction of $33 million from fiscal year 24-25 over the next 8 years. However, there's a cost increase in the following 5 years, totaling $49.5 million. Wanted to know that this analysis was performed by staff. This is unofficial. And if the board is interested in fully consider this option, we would engage our actuary, McLeod Watts, to do a formal estimate and present that to the board in time for rate setting. This scenario would retain the assumed 4% rate increase. So no changes to the assumed rate increase, but all other assumptions as previously presented remains.
It strikes me that the OPEB estimates we're using are at least 1.5 years out of date when we work with the numbers. We were up to almost 80% funded, maybe 89% funded ratio, and then we dropped when the market dropped, but incredibly market sensitive. I would hope that we could do a projection based on the very good, excellent performance of the market in the last year to see if we've now back on track for something even earlier than 2032. So that study will be of interest.
So the actuary did the study and presented to the board in February, so we can ask them to do another study, perhaps at the close of the fiscal year.
One of the challenges I have with the studies that we do is they're very comprehensive. They're generally about 1 year plus out of date because they use old data.
Correct.
You would hope that they could make an intelligent estimate based on where the market activities have gone as to what we might expect in the future with some reasonable level of confidence. And those could be dramatic changes and swings in the funded rate on the OPEB.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we can look at. The practice is to do a study every 2 years. We just did one a few months ago. I wouldn't necessarily recommend another formal study already. There's a lot more involved in a formal study than just a look at market results in terms of, kind of employee and retiree populations. But in the past, when we've had reports coming in from the actuary that we could potentially reduce contributions and achieve full funding sooner, the board's been interested in just maintaining the status quo funding ratios so that we're kind of prepared for a future downturn and still in good position. And so what happened is, a couple of years ago, we had these great returns in the fiscal year ending 21, and we could have lowered our contributions and we decided not to, and we would just be fully funded sooner. Then what happened the next year wasn't as good. And if we had reduced our contributions, we would have been put in the position of having to increase them right back again to keep the 2032 date. So I would just caution us against getting too reactionary to individual year results.
We're in full agreement, not suggesting a full, that's what I said, not suggesting a full analysis, but I would hope that based on overall market performance, that they would be able to give us a general estimate. Will we be getting an extra? Are we on the upswing? I mean, the swings are dramatic. It's absolutely incredible how it's how much of a swing, because we dropped down about 56% funded after 2008, when we were told that we were 130% funded going into the labor negotiations that gave 2.5% at 55. So a dramatic changes in based on market. And then hopefully once we reach that, we go to a far more conservative investment strategy. So there is a greater level of predictability and stability. Thank you.
But again, I think what we're just trying to present with this item as an alternative, if the board were interested in retaining the 4% annual rate increase as opposed to going up to 5.5% as presented in kind of the default scenario by staff, this would be a way to save funds near term to make that work out financially. And Mr. Al, maybe you can move to the next slide and
Yes.
show the charts.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wanderlich. So, so this slide shows the projected ending balances with that option, and the bottom slide, as mentioned, it's 19 million below the reserve target. Now, that's with the baseline financial planning assumption and retaining the 4% rate increase. So that's that. The low year in fiscal year 2019 would be at 19 million below the reserve target. The top chart is delaying at 5 years. So that would have an impact to the projected ending balance, and at the final year in 29, it would be 3.2 million above the reserve target. So that's a big swing with this option. It's just an alternative that we could look at if the board's interested. So that's scenario one. Scenario two, that's the second scenario, is the minimum SFPUC purchase. So this scenario again assumes a 4% rate increase and all of the assumption as previously described. So the current financial planning assumes purchasing 1,000 acre foot of San Francisco water above the minimum. This is to provide a buffer, to provide flexibility in meeting demands with district policy targets. This option would achieve an estimated $2.6 million in annual savings. Again, should the board be interested in pursuing this option, our staff would work to identify potential impacts to hardness or other objectives to inform rate setting. So the impact of this alternative scenarios is taking the projected ending balance from 19 million below the reserve target to $8.4 million below the reserve target. It's not going to take it all the way there, but it helped to lower the amount below the reserve target.
Again, I'd encourage you to get in preliminary general review, not a formal study of what we would expect from the market, and see if we might be able to adjust this chart.
Yeah. So this chart is to show for a combination of the pension OPEB funding plus lower SFPUC to minimum purchase. So it's dramatic. Go from 19 below the reserve target to $13.8 million above the reserve target. Just to show a combination of the two scenarios. Finally, this is the final slide for the board. So there's a final financial planning consideration for the rates process that's not reflected in the budget. One of them is the actuals, current fiscal year actual that will be presented to you as part of the rate setting process when the fiscal year close at the end of June. There's potential for additional capital investments pending your discussion next week to review the draft CIP engineering report and or a placeholder for results of the water supply master plan. Additional capital projects deferral options to offset new investments and or reduce overall costs during the water rates planning horizon. And then finally, potential for updated water demand forecast based on summer demand.
On this, has it not been our experience that San Francisco suspends the minimum purchase requirements in a drought? We've had that the last couple of times. In fact, we did a drought surcharge. where we were going to, we raised over $12 million for the stated purpose of paying the additional cost of water from San Francisco. And in fact, none of the money went to that purpose because San Francisco removed their minimum purchase requirement. But more importantly, we have the ability, I believe, and I would encourage us to pursue, to become more water marketeers of our total waters coming in. And there are other, particularly BOSCA members, that have an interest in acquiring water from the district when they're faced with a tier 2 shortages of up to 30, reductions up to 35%, and have the ability to afford to pay any price for that water. So the water market is something that can hopefully be put into our planning scenario, becoming water marketeers. And particularly if we get more access to controlled banked water in the, probably in the San Joaquin Valley.
Yeah, I would say in terms of this budget, I would say that sort of analysis really is kind of a major sort of water supply. How do you want to manage your water supplies? What does our future look like from a water supply standpoint? And I think, if the board is interested in doing things like that, I think that's a water supply master planning thing, right? If we're going to be changing up our water supply portfolio in order to achieve certain objectives, I mean, that's what we need to understand is what those objectives are.
Thank you.
That ends my part of the presentation. I'll be happy to answer any more questions or take any homework assignment from you before I hand it back over to Mr. Wanderlich.
I don't have any questions. Are you looking for feedback on the scenarios tonight, or are we saving that for future board?
We'll just jump to the next slide and I'll hand that over to Mr. Wanderlich to answer your question. Thank you.
Yes, we were hoping for feedback on those scenarios. Again, that's not the default proposal staff is making, but if there was board interest in finding ways to reduce some expenses, then those were some things that we thought were worth looking at. Again, I wasn't necessarily sensing a lot of enthusiasm from the board as those were being discussed, but maybe I misread that. So,
Well, I'll say I think as a board and as a district, we've worked incredibly hard to focus on paying down our unfunded liabilities. And I think it would be shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit if we were to kind of pull back from that. I don't know that that would be a scenario that I would really be willing to consider, or at least not at this point. I don't know that that would be the right move for us. I'm open to scenario number 2 of minimizing our SFPUC purchases. I obviously want to see some kind of projection on how that's going to impact operations, how that's going to impact hardness in particular, because we know that that's a very key concern for many of our customers, especially in the northern part of our district. And yeah, I can see the rationale behind scenario 2. I don't know if I'm completely there yet, but of the 2 scenarios that were presented tonight, I'd be leaning much more heavily towards the second option than the first.
okay. Yeah, and just to also clarify on the second option, unlike the first, the second has no direct impact on the proposed budget for next fiscal year. Because we know we're going to have to buy more San Francisco water until the PFAS treatment facility is online. And so that's more of an impact once hardness is the controlling factor in our San Francisco purchases. And so the good news is that we can work with the water resources team and we can prepare some information for the board for the rate setting process and try to give you an idea of what it could mean to for hardness targets and how frequently we may have to make excursions, what % above 150 to feel like we can reliably live within the minimum purchase. And so we can plan to prepare that, but you don't need to make any decision as it relates to the next fiscal year budget for us to continue to pursue that scenario.
Understood. Okay. Yeah, that planning would definitely be helpful because I can already see customers, rightfully so, would be coming to us saying, "You're raising my rates and anticipating my water is going to get harder." You know, and
Yes.
just having at least something, some kind of data to show them what they should expect, why we're doing this. That will be very.
If I can note on the PFAS, strongly support our continuing to stay under the projected 4.4 parts per trillion. However, that ruling and regulation doesn't come into full effect and for 5 years from 2 weeks ago. So we, from an absolute regulatory viewpoint, we have potentially some flexibility here, but I would encourage us to continue to blend and stay below 4 parts per trillion.
Yeah, that's the staff's objective, and that's really the controlling factor in our San Francisco purchases right now. But once the PFAS facility is online, as long as TP2 is up and running and desal is up and running, right, that we don't have unexpected outages at those facilities in our normal operations, then we'll switch to the controlling factor being hardness, because we'll be able to produce 6 million gallons a day of groundwater that will be PFAS free, plus the San Francisco water will be PFAS free, plus there will be some groundwater, untreated groundwater that's blended in that will still keep the PFAS levels below the 4 parts per trillion. But again, the hardness will be the target, because the groundwater treated for PFAS will not have mineral content removed, right?
Is there a board action suggested or recommended to adjust our guidelines for the hardness from 150 parts per milligrams per liter?
No. So what we're trying to understand specifically for scenario 2, and I'm seeing potentially some interest in staff doing some additional follow-up work on this, but I'd like to hear from the rest of the board, is what we would do is we would come back to the board and say, as staff, for us to reliably plan on living within the minimum purchase requirement in our long-range financial planning, this is what it could mean for hardness. And so we'll bring that information back. And then at that point in time, you could make a decision about what sort of assumptions and planning priorities you want to make. It is always staff's objective to purchase the minimum San Francisco if we can. That's always what we're trying to work toward. But that's not always entirely within our control in terms of if there's an unexpected facility outage or other situations. It can require that we have to buy more San Francisco, or in this case, it's San Francisco's own operations as one example, because they had Hetch Hetchy delivery shut down for a longer period of time while they were working on their own capital improvements. And the local supply is higher hardness, which meant we had to buy more local supply to blend with our groundwater to meet our hardness targets for that period. So there can be a range of factors that go into it. And so again, we can work with the water resources team and help the board understand what the impacts would be if we wanted to be more focused on sticking at the minimum purchase.
And there is a whole additional layer that goes on top of this that you'll just be knee deep in next week when we're talking about that CIP engineering report and kind of providing an update for the board, because we have this sort of nearer term, sort of normal operations objectives. And Reka is going to captivate you next week with a whole lot of information about other things that we consider in terms of the longer range planning. And that includes operations contingency way without certain facilities available and without certain water supplies available. And there's a lot of criteria that goes into that analysis, and we'll be very interested in the board's thoughts about things like, are you able to tolerate an excursion in the sort of higher hardness objectives for limited periods of time in order to
maximize the availability of existing systems and to kind of try and find the right balance for water quality and long-term improvements. But that's next week. And by the way, I'll just mention it now. I was going to mention it later. I just want to eliminate confusion if at all possible. Next week's going to seem really odd because we're going to be talking about the CIP engineering report, and we're going to be talking about potential changes to the CIP in future cycles. So what you saw this evening is this year's CIP recommendation, but we're going to be talking about things that are partially within the current CIP, but potential new additions to the CIP over the next cycle or future cycles. And I know it's going to be confusing, and we're doing it this way on purpose for a number of reasons that we'll talk about next week, but I just want to plant that in your head right now. Next week, we're not talking about the current CIP. Rather, we're talking about future changes, and we want to bounce our thinking off the board and as we continue to refine that over the next year or so.
Sure. So maybe we can, Director Huang, I don't know if you had thoughts about interest in further analysis on either of the scenarios.
So scenario one is a no-go for me because in the long run, it's going to cost us more money. It doesn't seem to make sense. We just ended up spending more money just for, like a better term, short-term flexibility. What's that? Scenario two, I am a little bit on the fence yet again. We could talk about deviations from the hardness goal. I can understand that, and that's something I could tolerate. But I am a little bit worried about not just customer perception, but flexibility to the district's operation. Because in a very strange sense that purchasing additional San Francisco water allowed us to operate our well fields easier, for lack of a better word, because our wells are not all the same and they don't all have the same water quality, right? So San Francisco water seems to be this buffer, allow us to pull everything together. So in addition of just thinking about hardness, I would like to understand a little bit more about operational impact and what happens, the financial impact, what happens if we have these exceedances, right? Because it's not just serving harder water. There's cost to the district. If we have to operate things differently, our staff has to be pull-out position, doing additional work. So if there are costs associated with that, I would also like to understand that. Because right now we just very narrowly focus on just changing hardness. So they are the intangibles. I would like us to think about it a little bit. And I am interested in seeing when you say increase hardness and exceedance, I want to know the frequency and the magnitude.
Right.
In a way, you don't have to give me down to the decimal point. More of a very generally, this is what we are thinking. So don't try way too hard because we're still talking at very high conceptual level. I just need some concepts and ideas to help me think.
Right. And again, it's always going to be our objective to minimize SFPUC purchases and live within the established target of 150.
Right.
That's always the baseline target. It's just from a planning perspective, if we want to remove that extra 1,000 acre feet each year from our long range planning, we have less flexibility. And so I will get with the water resources team and we will plan to give some idea of what it would mean.
Okay. You answer one of my concerns about PFAS because we need to buy that water right now in order to blend it down. So that's non-negotiable.
Yeah, so that's why this scenario doesn't include any reductions for the upcoming fiscal year, right? It would just start for after the PFAS treatment is online.
And just on the philosophical discussion side, this is something we're already striving for, right? This is something that we've been working on for years and years and years. We always do our best to minimize purchase. Right. Now you're just putting a number out there and said, we're going to try to achieve this number and see what the rate impact is. That's how I'm viewing your proposal?
Yeah, so if I were to use this current fiscal year as an example, and let's suppose we already had PFAS treatment online, right?
Okay.
Then the length of outage of receiving Hetch Hetchy water was more than normal this year because of San Francisco's own capital improvement program and what they're working on. And so if we were to have a higher focus on minimizing our San Francisco, then we might have said for 2 months, we would have been striving towards some different higher hardness objective so that we could stay on a trajectory of minimizing San Francisco purchases. Right. So that's just to like give and I don't want to say specifically what that number would be. I want to get with the water resources team and we can try to put some parameters around that. But that would be an example of that's a reason why we plan in our long range planning on buying more than the minimum. And if we're not, if we want to keep the 150 as like a hard target, then I think we need to keep that buffer in there for situations like we experienced earlier this fiscal year.
Thank you.
Okay, well, then to close it out, I appreciate staff bringing in option 1, although I would hold that back kind of as a last resort type thing. I'd like to keep where we're going. Option 2, or scenario 2, excuse me, I'm fine. I think we need, one of the things I would like to see though would be perhaps a comparison, because if my memory serves me correct, we were at 200 at one or over. So we've made incredible improvements. And so the question then is, I mean, what are we talking about for a variance here? 150, 160 versus 150, 210. Not that I want to go back to 210. I've kind of got that hammer in the garage to break the water off as it comes out. But, that's where we were. And so, not that I want to go back there, I don't. But still, that's why I would say, okay, I'm good. I'm okay with that. Moving beyond a couple times. We've done great efforts to get where we are. San Francisco water's getting expensive.
Yeah, and I think a part of what precipitated us even thinking about this is we just got hit with an unexpected 9% rate increase that's going to cost us $2 million a year, even at minimum purchase levels. We're spending an extra 6 to 7 million this year because compared to budget because of these issues with the that have necessitated us buying more San Francisco water, and so it's just front of mind right now.
Okay, further comments, questions?
So if I could, just to make sure, I think what we heard as staff this evening is first, there are a few things where we need to provide some follow-up information. But in terms of specific budget adjustments compared to what was proposed for next fiscal year, I think what I heard is that the board, as a whole was comfortable with what's been presented. And so that no specific changes are being requested by the board as a whole in terms of specific capital expenditures, operating expenditures, staffing levels. And so we will probably prepare, because Director Sethi wasn't able to be here this evening, I think we will not prepare like a comprehensive presentation on the budget for next week, but we may do a brief recap. We will prepare for the July rate setting workshop some more information and parameters pertaining to the scenario 2 that was discussed tonight. So we will be ready for that. We did talk in terms of monthly billing, getting back to that item. I think what we will do is within the rate setting workshops, we will plan probably in August to have a discussion about some various customer service related programs, including use of the property tax roll for collections and billing that we've heard requests from some board members for. We'll probably review some of our delinquency policies and processes based on some comments that have been made, and we'll also bring back some more information and continue to discuss monthly billing then. It's not critical that that decision is made right now. And so we'll be prepared for that. But if we could go to the next slide, in terms of our next steps, next week's workshop will really focus on the engineering report, and we will plan, I think, just some very brief budget recaps, largely to the benefit of Director Sethi, who is unable to be here tonight, but we would anticipate will be here next week.
Would it be possible to have a list of projects that are not included in the capital project that we may wish to consider at sometime in the future?
I mean, projects that were once in the CIP or projects
That
that
have
we,
been discussed, thought of, or at least
wow.
whether it be just our, the what if list. But for.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to give you a sense of the CIP, I think Reika would know these numbers better than me, but I'm pretty sure when all the staff, kind of requests first came in at the beginning of the CIP process, we probably had like $100 million CIP, and it kind of, we look at the priorities and resources to accomplish that. So I think the idea of trying to put a list together of every project that's been thought of or considered at some point, I'm not sure how feasible that is. I mean, I think you have in your mind a very small set of projects that you're specifically thinking about and perhaps referenced over the course of the workshop.
Well, I've mentioned a few, but if there was a wish list that people came up with, it would be interesting to at least, hopefully someone compiled all the items that were evaluated and considered, and these are the ones we selected. But at least we have the documents of what people had suggested might be something to look at. And over 25 years, some of those are going to float, get buoyancy.
Perhaps if I could make a comment about the process of identifying projects for inclusion in the CIP. The project identification process is essentially driven by operational needs or master planned infrastructure projects and programs. And even though some projects may not have made it into this 2-year or mid-cycle budget, they have somehow been programmed into the CIP to the extent that Ms. Gunther shared with the board. So they are included in that number, but they may not have surfaced to that mid-cycle budget. So just to understand the request, Director Weed, are you asking for those projects that were presented and proposed?
No, it was just mentioned that when they went out, they came back with a much larger list of projects of which these were selected from. I don't know, would it be possible to provide a list of all the dream, and some dreams, some fanciful, everything that was thrown into the pot, or at least thrown into consideration. And then you came down to this, but there was obviously a larger universe. If that could be captured, it'd be interesting.
I can answer that question. As part of mid-cycle update, we adhere to a strict criteria. We didn't add every single project that would be treated as a wish list project. I could compile those projects together. Those were going to be considered for future CIP. So those projects are a small list of projects that we didn't include during the mid-cycle because of the nature of the update that we are doing today. But generally speaking, during 2-year budget cycle, we add everything that comes our way in terms of a reasonable justification to the project. So those have been added till last year. Only for this round of mid-cycle update, we captured the critical projects, but I can bring in those additional projects that came to our attention.
Okay, and it doesn't even have, it could have you go with maybe up to $4 marks. And so this is $1, this is $2, this is $3, and just to give some sense of scope, but at least you have a list of things that people have thought about so that we can review that.
Take a look and see what we can come up with. We got some pretty creative people here. And by the way, next week at the workshop, we will have some of those because again, there's going to be some discussion about things that are not in the current proposed CIP. So there will be some of those, but I don't, it's not going to be an exhaustive list. It's a number of things that we have been thinking about and even in the past planning for and doing other analyses related to the, these contingency operations and other improvements that we may need to make to our system in order to accommodate different futures. And so that's kind of be part of the theme. So it's not going to be a broad list of everything, but we will look into that request. But next week we'll have some of that built in.
Great. So, so again, in terms of the budget next steps, we will prepare a quick overview for next week, but we will start planning toward the June 13th board meeting for budget adoption. And then June 27th, so 2 weeks after the regular June meeting, is generally held in reserve for budget adoption if needed. Again, this year, we're likely going to need that day for a special board meeting regardless of budget adoption because we are tentatively working toward a water resources workshop on that day as well. And then we will see you all July 18th to kick off the water rates process. We've already been engaging with our consultant on that, and I can assure you we will have a very full workshop that day.
Very good chance I will not be at that workshop. 2 days. There's a wedding in a different country on July 20th. So, just throwing it out there.
Well, we will have workshops again in
All these other
August
ones,
and
that one's
September. And I
yes.
think given the scope and volume of what we're going to cover, July 18th, if anybody is unable to make that as staff, we can also plan a separate meeting with that director.
I appreciate it, but I think we'll see. I just can't make things.
Well, we appreciate all the focus this evening, and that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you, staff. That was a lot of work today.
Great presentations. Appreciate it.
And I do believe we have one more thing on our agenda tonight, though.
That's right. Well, you have two more things.
Well, two, but one we're gonna have to forego unless Director Sandy comes walking in the room shortly.
Okay.
We have a request for a break.
You want, mine's super short.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe take a short break.
Okay, let's go ahead and take a short break. Hey, it looks like we're back on recording, back in session. General Manager report.
I just have one very brief item, and it's just to make sure that the board is aware that the Niles Cone Basin and our groundwater recharge operations have been elevated. The DWR now has a lot more data about groundwater basins and recharge and so forth with Sigma. And they recently released a report that showed the Niles Cone is one of the top 10 basins in the entire state of California. More than 500 basins. We're the top 2%. And that's based upon essentially how effective recharge operations are, or how well the basin recharges. And so obviously that's part geology, but it's also part how we manage the basin and how it's a big priority for us. And we actively manage that basin and work really hard to maximize its use. And so I just thought I'd mention that as another achievement by our groundwater resources team and everybody that supports the Niles Cone.
Did they rank all the basins in the state?
There's data on all the basins in the state. They just released the top 10 ranking. I'm not sure. I'm sure with the data you could rank them all, but they didn't release that.
Okay. Is there some that are suspect?
Well, I think that's great. I mean, we
That we're
put so
involved
much
in.
effort in that. Why we are where we are today.
This district has always been very special, right? We actually invested in understanding and modeling our groundwater basin and manage it accordingly.
Yep.
Right? We took a very strong stewardship position towards this basin, and it shows.
Yeah. And we just do so much to optimize every little thing, every drop, every cubic yard of the basin. So Just want to pass that on. That completes my reports.
Appreciate that. Director's comments from any director this evening? I don't believe Director Sethi will be walking in the door any soon, and we'll push that out to the next meeting. I guess we're ready to close the meeting. I would like to close this meeting as I started. In memory of our fellow sister agency director, Tom Hanley, who recently passed away. Condolences to his family. Support to the district staff over there. That meeting is adjourned.